Chapter 101. What are you doing? Huaisha heard Fu Yi screaming, "Get out of my way! I'll call the police if you do this again." "Don't panic, little girl. Have fun with me," a glib voice sounded. Then Fu Yi screamed even louder. "What is this?" Huaisha's eyes widened. He didn't know if he should be excited or shocked. It was the most common scene in urban novels where the hero saves the damsel in distress. It was finally his turn. He was so excited. It was his first time encountering such a thing. It was urgent. He rubbed his hands impatiently, rushed into the alley, and kicked the people into the garbage. Finally, he looked back at Fu Yi, who was panicking on the ground. "Are you okay?" Huaisha grinned and squeezed out a reliable and considerate smile. Fu Yi looked at him blankly. Her expression changed. She looked at the two people he kicked into the garbage, then looked at him, and then looked at the garbage again. She was stunned. Something seemed wrong? F***ck. What's going on? The middle-aged man who was kicked into the garbage got up and stared at her angrily. "We agreed on 80 yuan a day. What's going on? Little girl, how can you be so unkind? Director, I want more money. What the hell?" Huaisha was stunned. Then, he saw the camera mounted on the wall and a few students who were lying around awkwardly. There was also a person who was clinging to the wall and preparing to jump down. Not only was she wearing a ridiculous costume and a red cloak, but she was also wearing a Peppa mask on her face. What the hell? How could there be a knockoff of that? In the silent awkwardness, Huaisha scratched his face and looked awkwardly at Fu Yi. "Oh, you're filming." It took a long time for the students of the drama club to appease the two middle-aged men who came to be extras. They bowed, apologized, and even added money. Huaisha's kick was really fierce. Even if he deliberately held back his strength, if it wasn't for the garbage heap, he might have been directly sent to the hospital. Fu Yi happened to be free. She sat beside them and drank water. She looked at the embarrassed Huaisha and asked, "Are you done with your leave?" "Ah." Huaisha nodded. "Class starts next week. What's going on? Isn't the school's anniversary next Wednesday? The student union is planning to film a micro-movie, and since I'm in charge of this, I might as well find someone to write a script and be the female lead." At this point, she glanced at Huaisha and couldn't help but shake her head. "I really didn't expect a hero to save a damsel in distress. Forget it." Huaisha flipped through the script, pointed at the title and asked, "What the hell is this Peppa swordsman?" "That's right. Recently, whenever I meet with my dad, I always hear him talking about Peppa or something. Occasionally, he would even scold someone. When it came to naming it, he couldn't help but do it." Fu Yi waved her hand indifferently. "It's just a small detail. Don't worry about it." Huaisha was speechless. He flipped through the script. It was really average. The special effects were mediocre. However, he couldn't expect too much from a group of students for self-entertainment. However, this is the last line in the script. Huaisha flipped to the last line and pointed at it. The protagonist puts on a mask in front of everyone and says, "I am Peppa. Can you guys be careful? A certain company that often uses castles as their logo will sue you. This is called a tribute. A tribute, do you understand?" And this, the sequel at the back. Huaisha held the last page and asked, "It's fine that the first part is called Thunder Rises, the birth of Peppa, but what the hell is this Peppa Swordsman fights Optimus Prime and Peppa Swordsman fights Calabash Brothers? Isn't this a lot of budget points?" Fu Yi glared and suddenly became indignant. Otherwise, the stingy school wouldn't even be willing to buy a bottle of mineral water. Where would they find the money to hire a cameo? It wasn't easy to hire a cameo, but someone jumped out and kicked me. Do you think it's easy for me? It's my fault, my fault. Huaisha sighed and begged for mercy. However, Fu Yi grinned and looked at him mischievously. "However, are you looking forward to the day when you can save me and increase my favorability? Don't mention it. If you mention it again, something will really happen. Thinking of how Director Fu pulled out her gun and shot him, Huaishur felt bitter. Besides, it was useless even if he increased her favorability. She had already locked the upper limit. From the first day they met, Huaishur knew how clear she was about her life plan. Enter the student union to accumulate experience, get admitted to Yenjing University, enter the student union to obtain an excellent cadre resume, strive for the American Ivy League exchange student quota. Thanks to Director Fu's previous bad behavior, she had long been completely disappointed in the romance that little girls would be interested in. Long before she became an adult, she had already divided her life into utilitarian categories, leaving no room for romance. Even though she looked petite and pitiful, she was a strong woman in her bones. If he wanted to play some strategy, he would probably be fooled by her. Tsk, how boring. Fu Yi didn't find any wavering in his expression, so she pouted unhappily. At this time, the crew behind her was ready and called her loudly. After she turned around and responded, she threw the water into the trash can and said goodbye to Huaishur. I'm leaving first. Huaishur waved her hand, but she was caught off guard when she felt her hand land on her shoulder. And, she grinned and smiled. Welcome back. Huaishur was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but laugh. After bidding farewell to those distant disputes and strangeness, he once again returned to his daily life. When he returned home, he saw the old figure squatting in the nursery, rolling up his pants and sleeves, carefully watering the newly grown flowers. Welcome back. The old man looked up and asked, Young master, how did it go? Everything went well. Huaishur waved his hand to reassure him and asked casually, Fang Shu, what are we eating tonight? Well, the market just sent some very good foie gras. How about I buy some mushrooms and snails? Fang Shu pondered and said, Mushroom soup with stewed foie gras and baked snails with cheese should taste good. Roman cuisine? Well, if you don't like it, sashimi is also fine. Grilled foie gras sushi tastes quite rich. Huaishur suddenly found it difficult to choose. Can we have some of both? Fang Shu's expression became complicated. In fact, Ms. Crow has already reflected to me about this matter. Your body fat has been a little high recently, and she hopes that I won't make high-calorie food like corn crisps. Bullsh *T. Huaishur was furious. She's the one who eats the most. Hearing this, he was furious. Where is she? The same old place. Fang Shu pointed in the direction of the basement. Also, Ms. Crow also said that she would like to invite you over when you come back. She's been waiting for me for a long time, right? Huaishur sighed. After putting down the piano case and jacket, he walked to the basement. Fang Shu's surname was naturally Fang. But in fact, this name was also given to him by Huaishur. After all, in essence, he was actually the incarnation of the entire Stone Marrow Hall. It was not wrong to just call him Stone Marrow, but if he called him that, it would still feel a little strange. As for the name, Fang Shu said, Young master, you can do whatever you want. To be honest, I'm actually just a failed product made by master. The reason I'm able to survive until now is all thanks to master's pity and protection. The master Fang Shu spoke of was Huaishur's great-grandfather, Huai Guang, who had taken root in Xan Hai. He was a stage 4 ascendant of Dongxia's lineage. According to Fang Shu, when Huai Guang was old, in order to prevent his descendants from falling into decline after his death, he spent a lot of effort and resources in an attempt to build a spirit coffin. Thus, after a thorough search, he found a clear and obvious ley line near Qingxiu Mountain, and then the Stone Marrow Hall was built. As a rare tool, the spirit coffin's effect was not only to allow a ascendant's soul to be reborn in a new body, but Huai Guang knew that his future was bleak, so he had no intention of occupying the bodies of his descendants to prolong his feeble existence. What he valued was its ability to allow people to ascend without any repercussions. In short, it was the ability to give people souls. Even if it would lose its effect after a single use, it was still a rare miracle. Unfortunately, even as a stage 4 ascendant, the existence of a spirit coffin was too extravagant and rare. Huai Guang could only follow the blueprint and use the incomplete blueprint he had obtained by chance to construct it. In the end, it was inevitable that he would fail. He didn't obtain the spirit coffin, but instead, he was given the stone marrow hall's origin substance by accident. It was as if his Midas touch had turned him into gold. After this failure, Huai Guang didn't have the resources to construct a second time, so he could only give up. However, he didn't erase the stone marrow hall's origin substance out of anger. Instead, he spent a lot of effort to maintain this consciousness that was still in the process of being nurtured. He hoped that after 100 years, this kindness would be returned to his descendants through this budding consciousness. Fang Shu was indeed Huai Shi's family member. In terms of seniority, there was no one more qualified than him to be considered a part of the Huai clan. If his descendants had been able to live a little longer, they would at least have been able to enjoy a resurgence. Unfortunately, after only 50 years, the Huai clan had fallen to an unimaginable state. Fang Shu's fragmented consciousness wanted to salvage the situation, but it was powerless. He could only watch on helplessly as Huai Shi shouldered all of the burden. It wasn't until Huai Shi's wish passed through the wish crystal and landed on Fang Shu's body that he was able to recover his missing origin substance that he was barely able to manifest. Even if he couldn't walk out of the stone marrow hall, he was finally able to walk around freely. According to Crow's conclusion, the stone marrow hall had already become a relic from the border, and a very rare one at that. Huai Shi couldn't be bothered to listen to a bunch of nonsensical analysis. In any case, Fang Shu was a part of his family, so there was no point in looking into it too much. And after being in charge of the house for so many years, Fang Shu seemed to have grown quite fond of his identity as a housekeeper. Whether it was cleaning, cooking, gardening, or maintaining the nursery, he was very adept at it all. Fixing antennas from above, digging cables from below, as long as it was a household matter, there was nothing he didn't know how to do. Huai Shi didn't have to worry about anything as long as he was able to take care of everything on his own. He had already gone from being a struggling youth to a fat otaku who ate 5 meals a day. In less than a week, he had gained a few kilograms of weight. He was so happy that he couldn't even wear the pants he had just bought. And now, someone wanted to cut off his food budget? How dare they? Even if I, Huai Shi, died in this house today, I wouldn't miss a single bite of food if I jumped down from here. Chapter 102. I'm not eating anymore, I'm really not eating anymore. 10 minutes later, Huai Shi looked at the 80 kilograms on the scale. Tears streamed down his face as he sat on the ground and cried. It was too exaggerated to be this fat. Crow looked at him coldly. 3 bottles of happy drinks every day, half a kilogram of hot and dry noodles in the morning, 2 fried chicken for lunch, cake and milk tea for afternoon tea, a lot of meat for dinner and taco chips for supper. I say, haven't you been too relaxed recently? Even if you're a sublimator who consumes energy faster than ordinary people, you can't eat like this, right? Huai Shi was stunned. Do I eat that much? Otherwise, why do you think I'm so fat? Crow asked. Although a sublimator who has been transformed by the stigmata already has a lot of metal and mutation in their body, and can no longer be measured by the usual weight ratio, the transformation of a ghost is obviously towards the lighter weight, right? The standard weight should be 2/3 of a normal person's weight. How did you eat yourself to become the heavy type? Unknowingly. It's old Fang who spoiled you too much. Crow shook his head and threw a densely packed list over. Huai Shi looked down and felt dizzy. What's this? A list for your weight loss plan. Crow said indifferently. There's also a follow-up plan to strengthen yourself. You're still too lacking in strength. Me? Huai Shi pointed at himself in disbelief. He was lacking in strength? My Huai-Hi's little Peppa had defeated a Stage 3 powerhouse before Stage 1. How was he lacking in strength? Don't tell me that just because you've beaten up a few second-rate trash, you think that everyone in the world is mediocre? Crow retorted. For example, can you beat that amber in the forest? Huai sure was speechless. Indeed, Crow was right. After all, they had the experience of fighting side by side. Although both sides were deliberately dragging each other down, he had to admit that purely in terms of combat skills, it was difficult for him to do anything to her. But this is different, right? Huai sure retorted. That's a rich woman armed to the teeth. She's a top Xinhua player with 100,000 exclusive customer service. How can I, a player with no money, fight her? Are you sure? Crow glanced at him and said, Friend, if you want to calculate money, you've already spent more than 30 million yuan, okay? The cost of the stigmata is spirit alone was more than 25 million, and this was just the price. This kind of custom-made adjustment stigmata can only be made by a master. Even if you have money, you won't be able to buy it. So expensive? Huai sure was shocked. He suddenly had the urge to go out and sell himself, so don't worry. When it comes to spending money, you don't have to be afraid of anyone at the same level. Crow said, purely in terms of foundation, you aren't inferior to any other ascender of the same level. In terms of skill, the skills obtained from the Book of Destiny are enough to allow you to easily take advantage of those ascenders who only obtained a passing grade. But did you get any improvement from the Red Gloves records recently? Huai sure shook his head. Now it was clearly written in his skills. Dagger Fighting LV8, Theravada Dual Blade Technique LV6. After clearing the records of the purified people, he obtained a new skill called Experience of Chaotic Warfare. It was mainly used in group battles, but it was a pity that its level was limited to LV4, and it was impossible for him to improve it further. It was already the limit for a fragment that lacked a systematic system to reach this level. After all, it's a batch of fast products. It's already commendable that it can help you build a good foundation, but it's difficult to truly reach the peak with just these. Crow sighed with some annoyance. I still have to find you a good teacher, but it's hard to find someone in this field, and it's even harder to find someone trustworthy. There are always people who like to keep a trump card. It couldn't be helped. Without the records and simulations of the Book of Destiny, everyone's skills were honed from years of accumulation and trials of blood and death. It was difficult to purely rely on money to buy. And Huai sure couldn't stroll around the streets with a gun and stab anyone he saw in the back just to get a new record. Besides, this was the hard threshold. He was only grade 1, and it was already a miracle that he could reach this level. It was unrealistic to ask for more. However, fortunately, although you've reached a bottleneck in the improvement of your skills, you haven't started to improve your stigmata. With that, Crow put away the familiar bronze box on the table. Then he poured out a few pieces of the dust of the liberated, which were still warm, from the crucible and threw them to Huai sure. One piece. Just maintain this level of daily training. Huai sure pulled open his collar and looked down at the big hole in his chest. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Every time before a fight I have to pay for it. Something feels strange. It's not strange. In fact, you don't need to pay for it. Crow calmly said something extraordinary. Grade 1 stigmata has its limits. A structure that's too thick can't react flexibly, and a structure that's too thin can't bear too much power. If you want to strengthen one aspect, you will inevitably weaken the other. She said, This is the trade-off, Huai sure. Wait. Huai sure was stunned. What did you weigh? Crow said, I weighed it and felt that the part of the power system wasn't necessary, so I changed it to an external type. Look at the hole in your chest, it's so impressive. Huai sure's eyes widened. So you made this? No wonder he kept feeling that something was off. You have to think positively, Crow said. Crow said, With the remaining parts, I've helped you weave all of them into pseudo-nerves and reflex circuits. Now, you can attack at twice the speed of someone of the same level. How is it? Are you happy? Are you happy? Happy my *SS. What kind of operation is cutting the mana bar to increase DPS? It turned out that his stigmata was really like a car. Without saying a word, she changed the fuel tank to an external type and then stuffed a nitrogen engine into it. Why sure almost vomited blood. Do you know that it's illegal to modify a car on the road? It's illegal for others to modify it. I'm doing a fandom creation, do you understand? Crow squinted at him and said, relax. It's been so many years since the Utopia split up. Do you think those guys who have fallen into hell and become the destruction element, the Golden Dawn, will ask you for copyright fees? Why sure covered his face. So can you please tell me at once what the hell this stigmata on my body has become? Don't worry, there are no hidden dangers or troubles. Sister's craftsmanship is famous. Speaking of this, Crow suddenly beamed. Although it's called a modification, it's actually a complete reconstruction. It's completely tailored to your fighting style. In addition to the Ghost's super adaptability to hell, I also added extra speed. Then there's the instantaneous explosive power provided by the external fuel. Therefore, the patience required for a long battle is relatively average. As for defense, sorry, it's equivalent to none. You'll have to rely on positioning. Anyway, the limit of a Tier 1 stigmata is there. No matter how good your defense is, you can only resist 1 or 2 slashes. It can't even block bullets. It's not cost-effective at all. So, our positioning is explosive. Crow said excitedly. You know the crispy killer, right? My standard has always been to kill my teammates in 1 round. We'll go up and explode, then run away. If we encounter someone who doesn't die, we'll find another opportunity to explode. If we can backstab, we'll backstab. If we can be despicable, we'll be despicable. With the heart poison and the aura of fear, even if we encounter someone with high HP and defense, they'll be seriously injured if they don't die. But when you encounter someone who's good at grappling and has a suppressive support, don't get entangled. Once your positioning is restricted, it's over. You didn't expect me to be a thief? Why sure smiled bitterly but did not say anything else. In all fairness, it wasn't easy to have so many of them. Unless there were multiple eyes, how could there be so many buckets in the world? Moreover, Crow's custom-made system was a high-precision special that played to its strengths and avoided its weaknesses. What else could he say? He sighed and looked at Crow seriously. What exactly are you trying to do? Puff. A pair of ghostly wings slapped the back of his head. Kid, why are you asking so many questions? Just focus on leveling up. Crow asked. Do you think Sister Crow would lie to you? Why sure rolled his eyes. Take a breath. We've already walked this path to the end. Why are you asking so many questions? He sighed and stuffed the Liberator's dust into his chest. Then, the familiar cold numbness spread out along with the darkness. In the blink of an eye, layers of origin flame appeared along with the explosive power. He once again turned into a ghost. Then, with a bang, Crow's pointer flew into the air and hit him on the head. Wrong. What's wrong? Huaisher's eyes widened. I haven't done anything yet. It's because you haven't done anything. Crow stared at the flames rising from his body. You haven't tried to control them at all. You're just venting. This path is completely wrong. What do I need to control? Yourself, your soul, your body, your sacred mark, and your everything. You need to make everything under your control and not let it all become your instinct. Crow lectured. The first step is to control the layer of flames on your body that has nothing but sound and light effects. Put them away. You need to make it look like you didn't take the medicine after you took it. Control? Huaisher looked at the flames around him in shock. These were the excess power that burst out from the collision between the Liberator's dust and the Tribulation ash. They were the channels through which his body vented. How was he supposed to control them? Moreover, I didn't take any medicine in the high road, pa. Another strike of the pointer. Converge, focus on converging. Don't think about venting. Keep your heart as still as water, Crow said. Imagine that you're a container. Don't let the water in the bottle sway out. Although he said that, it still didn't have much effect. Even though Huai Shi deliberately tried to control this explosive power, it had little effect. At first, the flames gradually shrank with his attention, but he couldn't attend to anything else. The flames on his head retracted, and the flames on his legs rose again. He felt like a sieve. Air was leaking everywhere. Chapter 103. The first step to controlling the sacred mark is to completely restrain the power brought by the dust of the liberated. The last time you took 3 pills, more than half of the power was wasted by you. Crow stood by the table and stared at him. Do you remember those ascenders you saw? The ones who were the most obvious beasties were weaklings. The more beasties they had, the weaker their control over themselves. Even if they looked impressive, they were just for show. The sacred mark is not independent, it is a part of you. You are the sacred mark, and the sacred mark is you. You have to control this miracle and merge it with you. But I can't control it. Huai Shi spread out his hands in frustration. As the flames on his arms were suppressed, the origin flame, which was full of ash, shot out from his palms. It was more than 2 feet high. This was a pretty good method of attack. It looked very cool, but it did not have any suppressive effect at all. First, you need to calm down, your heart as still as water. Crow suggested, let's try meditating first. Wasn't your meditation training quite successful? Huai Shi got up and carried the guqin case down from upstairs. After carefully restraining the flames, he had just picked up the guqin bow when he heard a small cracking sound. He had used too much strength and was about to crush the bow. He tried to relax, and the bow fell from his hands to the ground. But when he subconsciously tightened his grip, the bow broke into 2 pieces. Even the fingerboard of the guqin neck cracked. Damn. Fortunately, there was a spare bow at home. This time, Huai Shi was very careful and did not crush it. But when he tried to play, he found that he could not calm down at all. His insides were burning. Under the violent riot of the ash, he was distraught. All kinds of unpleasant scenes flashed in his mind, and the sound he pulled out became sharp and ear-piercing. He even began to doubt whether meditation was useful. You don't have enough willpower. Crow sighed. Do you know the training method of amber in the forest? In Yingzhou, the warriors would combine the meditation of the monks to train their mind. They intended to understand the so-called yin. In the end, it was to let oneself enter a state of absolute calmness. In the end, there was a practice called Saber Zen, just like what you are doing now. Crow slowly said, you can indulge, but you must hold back. You can be fanatical, but you must not cross the line. You have miracles, but not the other way around. Otherwise, you will be assimilated by the high-level stigmata sooner or later, and become a walking corpse. I understand. Huai Shi gritted his teeth and tried his best to get rid of the chaotic thoughts that filled his mind. He wanted to immerse himself in the sound of the zither. But even with so many years of practice, the sound of the zither was still intermittent. He was still unable to immerse himself in it. Until the crow whispered in his ear, think about it, every minute you delay, you'll burn 10,000. In an instant, the melodious sound of a zither rang out. Huai Shi's heart was as still as water. This was definitely the most painful day Huai Shi had ever played the zither. It lasted until 9 o'clock in the evening. After wasting 4 liberators' dust, he finally managed to restrain the source flame to a slightly acceptable level in the state of meditation. The special state brought about by the liberator's dust was extended by 1/3 to 15 minutes. In the state of low power consumption, Huai Shi felt as if he was going to suffocate at any moment, but he kept his consciousness and endured the huge pressure from his body. If you continue to train like this, you can see the initial results in about a month. Crow nodded and finally let him finish his meal. And Fang Shu seemed to be on time. The moment Huai Shi sat down at the table, he presented an appetizing dinner. Then he stood proudly at the side and watched Huai Shi eat. Huai Shi looked up at him blankly. Fang Shu, aren't you eating with me? Thank you for your concern, young master. I've already eaten. Fang Shu patted his chest and said proudly, in a few minutes, the hot water will be ready. Young master, you can go take a bath later. Your clothes are in the basket in the bathroom. Everything had been arranged so clearly and clearly. Huai Shi shook his head. No need to change. I plan to train a bit more tonight. Even if I change, I'll be sweaty and smelly. No, too much is as bad as too little. That's all for today. If you're still interested tonight, we have another program. Crow lowered his head and swallowed the snail that was bigger than his head in one gulp. He let out a long breath and praised, excellent craftsmanship. Fang Shu smiled happily. He bowed and gestured for them to enjoy, then left silently. I feel sorry for him. Huai Shi scratched his head. He's an old man. He has to do so much work every day. He feels guilty. Save it. Crow glanced at him. He's now the incarnation of the Stone Marrow Museum. Don't measure him by human standards. Maintaining this place is as simple as eating and drinking every day. It's not as difficult as you think. If you really want to thank him, hurry up and advance. Then go down to the border and find some good materials to repair this place. The maintenance of the coffin is an astronomical figure. You have to feel a sense of urgency and be mentally prepared. I understand. Huai Shi nodded and finished his meal quickly. After a short rest, he went to take a bath and leaned on the sofa in his pajamas. He didn't want to move anymore. What program are you talking about tonight? Didn't you just say we're at the border? Crow flapped his wings and the Book of Destiny flew out. The pages quickly flipped and finally stopped at the last fragment of the Red Gloves record. Today, I'll let you experience for yourself what the border and hell are. Things seem to be coming to an end. Huai Shi closed his eyes and skillfully blacked out. Like countless times in the past, he felt himself gradually fragmenting and spreading out like invisible gas and rain, slowly merging into the records of the Book of Destiny. Once again, he became the Red Glove. The first time he opened his eyes, he saw the adhesion of flesh and blood, the things called embryos, and himself called embryos. In the cold warehouse, countless embryos suspended in petri dishes were arranged in a formation that extended to the end of his vision. Life was like fish seedlings sleeping in countless fish tanks, waiting for maturity. The second time he opened his eyes, he saw a steel cradle and white-clothed nurses. They carried the smell of disinfectant and expressionlessly changed his diapers and breastfed him. Following that were countless fragments of fragments. It was as if the process of growing up had been omitted. All that remained in his memory were injections, examinations, and daily loyalty education. The rest wasn't forgotten, but deliberately cut off and not allowed to exist. Erased. The whole process was like production on an assembly line. Checkpoints after checkpoints were constantly processed. The qualified passed, and the unqualified were destroyed. Before the age of 17, they would give their consciousness to the priest. The fanatical teachers would constantly engrave their loyalty in their minds and dedicate their bodies to the motherland. The cold instructors would constantly add skills and instincts to their bodies to kill their own kind. In the end, 470 finished products called perfect people were selected from more than 10 times the number. Just these fleeting fragments were enough to make Huai Shi feel fear and disgust from the bottom of his heart. Life was like a product, fiddled with by hands, growing in the direction of the plan. Under the cold scrutiny, various indicators and even fertility were evaluated. The qualified passed, and the unqualified were destroyed. Moving forward along the assembly line, they passed through one test after another and difficulties after another. Finally, in the 17th year of his birth, he ushered in the final trial. Today you will usher in the final test and also judge your efforts in the past 17 years. The qualified will become a citizen of Rome after sublimation. Smiling scholars stood beside a huge machine, sending blessings and farewells to the students who were being tested. The priests anointed them with holy oil, the teachers encouraged them, and the instructors solemnly exhorted them. The whole world seemed to have warmed up. So kind. Until the person represented by Huai Shi walked into the huge machine. His limbs were fixed, tied to a cross, and finally sealed in a cabin that looked like a hamster ball. What was incredible was that he could still see the scene outside. Those warm and gentle faces, those expectant eyes, and those solemn expressions of expectation. He saw the display in the corner called the depth gauge, present. Then, the lights on countless meters lit up, and all kinds of strange parameters changed rapidly. Finally, through the cabin door, he saw the priest suddenly pull down the lever while solemnly chanting. It was as if the rope on the guillotine had been cut off. At that moment, violent tremors began. In the dizzying sharp sound, something seemed to be stripped away. Perhaps it was reason, perhaps it was air, or perhaps it was something that human beings relied on to exist. He fell from the sky, but it seemed that he had always been there. The bubble of reality was broken, and he peeked at the scene hidden behind the curtain. In the intense dizziness and pain, he saw endless yellow sand outside the cabin, as if the desolation and loneliness extended to the end of the world. The sky was full of cracks, and even a black gap appeared. Something huge flew past the broken sky, casting a ferocious shadow on the ground. There was a roaring sound in the wind. There was a vague shadow passing by outside the cabin. They were in groups, forming a long line. Their vague silhouettes were like ghosts, twisting under the scorching sun. Something among them cast an indifferent glance at him, with vicious mockery and compassionate pity. Fear made him cry out, but no one seemed to hear him. They gradually went away. After an unknown period of time, the violent tremors began again. He began to fall. More and more things were stripped away, or rather, he abandoned himself. He sank into an even deeper place. Chapter 104. Hell, Depth 1. Outside the cabin was the ruins of an ancient city. Dried bones and decayed steel were scattered everywhere as if they had experienced a disaster, but also as if they had not. It was just decay. Everything was silent. The entire city seemed to have died and turned into ruins. Only behind the huge broken arch in the sky, something seemed to have awakened. It opened its eyes and looked down at him with its huge eyes like the moon. Between the rotten sky and the ruined earth, pale faces fluttered like butterflies under the blood-red moonlight. The cold was like a sticky tide, swallowing him little by little. It took away all the warmth. Huai Shi could not help but start to pant. The fear and uneasiness conveyed in the memory was like a tide, constantly hitting him. He could only constantly strip the negative emotions from his body and turn them into ashes. Even so, he still could not stop the bone-piercing cold. The pain like a poison screamed in the depths of his consciousness. The subject roared, cried, and wanted to struggle, but no one spoke to him from beginning to end. Only the violent tremors began again. The depth gauge showed again. Depth 3. There was a roar outside the cabin, the loud noise of countless heavy machinery operating. Lava surged under the hollow ground, and the rusty assembly line could be seen. This was a project built on hell. The huge assembly line was constantly rotating, and countless people were hung on rows of scarlet hooks. It was as if they were still alive, constantly struggling and crying in despair. As the assembly line moved, they were sent to the workshop one by one. Amidst the constant cutting and crushing, the tragic screams and screams disappeared. In the end, only the sharp screams of steel rubbing against each other were left. Finally, the assembly line turned into tables, chairs, lamps, clocks, and bronze mirrors, sent to the deepest part of the darkness. Depth 7 War. War was like a flood and fire, drowning everything. The roars of battle filled their ears. Monsters were fighting against monsters. Tens of thousands of giants gathered in one place. Their bodies were covered in steel. They were like slaves being whipped by their masters. They roared as they stepped on the corpses and moved forward. The chains were pulled on the necks of larger creatures. The dozen or so women were hundreds of meters tall. They were completely naked, and their flaxen hair was burning with flames. They wept and howled in grief as they were pulled forward. They sang loudly in pain and despair. Hot blood dripped from the wounds on their backs that seemed to have been torn apart by wings. Above their heads hung a damaged halo. His voice was hoarse and shrill. Praise the dead god. Depth 9 In the endless ocean, the primordial soup of life was boiling. Huge beasts and monsters were devouring each other, and then they were turned into ashes by the thunder and fire that fell from the sky and the lava that cracked the earth. Once again, they began a futile reincarnation. Depth 10 Darkness, endless darkness. In the midst of the desolation, there was a figure sitting quietly on a metal rock, as if he was a prisoner. He was talking, he was singing, he was dancing. Waiting for death. Depth? Chaos, dazzling light, death, destruction, gods, despair, 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 despair. In the endless fall, he learned fear, began to scream, and fell into madness. Finally, he comprehended despair. In the end, when everything was about to be destroyed, that person subconsciously shouted out that name. Mom, and so, everything came to an abrupt end. Darkness struck. He woke up from the ignorance and shackles of mortals. His soul materialized. Sublimation began. Huaishur opened his eyes and stared blankly at the sky. After a long time, he finally reacted. Even though he had long been accustomed to fear, when he transformed into the Red Glove, it was still difficult to resist the despair and pain that he had once felt. It was as if someone was thrown into the deep sea and forced to grow gills. It was too rough. Rough, as if life had no meaning. Damn it! He felt a sharp pain in his head. He slowly propped himself up and drank the refreshing tea that Crow handed him. After a long time, he finally felt a little more relaxed. It seems that the deep tour of hell is very effective. Crow whistled. The Red Glove guy probably had a split operation in advance to avoid information leaks after his death. The records left behind are simply a mess. The most valuable one is probably this one. That organization, he was. Yes, more than 60 years ago, during the Cold War, in order to deal with the pressure from Dongxia and the Russian Federation on the Eastern Front, Holy Rome at that time made a decision to create the Sublimata Legion through racial screening and genetic modification. The name of this plan was the Fountain of Life. What you saw should be their method of artificial sublimation. It was too rough, forcibly throwing people into hell for a gamble. In the end, only 31 people succeeded in sublimation. The Red Glove was one of them. Later, because of the sequelae, only 4 people were left and the plan was stopped. In other words, the Red Glove is actually more than 60 years old? Huaishur couldn't believe it. Yes, that's right. How does it feel to beat up an old man? Thinking about how he was almost hung up and beaten up by an old man who was already half disabled, Huaishur felt like he was in a fantasy. But what made him even more incredulous was, the places he had entered, were they really hell? Hell actually existed in this world? Although he had heard of it many times, he had never taken it seriously. It was not until he saw it with his own eyes that he realized that there were such bizarre places in this world. To be precise, all the places excluded from the border can be called hell. What the Red Glove experienced should be the abyss fragments found by the Byzantine people when they were exploring outside the border. Most of them are worthless places. But if you want to understand it in a literal sense, why sure, hell does exist in this world, but they are not worlds after death. They are worlds that have already died, tombs piled up by the wreckage of worlds from who knows how many eras ago. In there, it is not surprising that anything can happen. Worlds that have died. Huaishur asked, worlds can also die. Just like how people can die, everything will eventually fade away. If you think it is death, then it is death. Crow said calmly, however, I prefer to call it nirvana and rebirth, a cycle. Well, that's enough for tonight. You should go to bed. Crow turned around, spread its wings and flew to the basement, while Huaishur got up and went to the bedroom upstairs. At that moment, their movements both paused and turned to look at each other at the same time. At the same time, they felt the abnormality from the Book of Prophesied Destinies. Huaishur reached his hand out and the Book of Prophesied Destinies appeared again. But this time, it was not as quiet as before. The Book of Prophesied Destinies slightly vibrated, as if it had received a call and was conveying some kind of message to Huaishur. This was the first time the Book of Prophesied Destinies had actively shown any abnormal signs to Huaishur. Huaishur looked at it in surprise, then finally looked at Crow. What's going on? Crow was silent, as if trying to figure something out. After a while, it suddenly chuckled. Interesting, she asked. When do you go to school? The day after tomorrow is Monday. Why? Crow nodded. So you're free tomorrow? Yeah. Since it's rare for you to have time. Crow thought for a moment, then charmingly winked at him. How about we go on a date together? Huaishur rolled his eyes, waved his hand, and turned to go to his bedroom. This woman has finally gone crazy. Inexplicably, before falling asleep, he suddenly thought, how good would it be if she had told him about her human form? And so, he didn't sleep for the whole night. The next day, early in the morning, Huaishur was woken up by Crow. Carrying a small backpack, Crow very expectantly jumped around his chest. Wake up, young man. A man who is not punctual will not be favored by a lady. Have you washed your hair? Have you wiped your face? Have you brushed your teeth? Have you changed into new clothes? Have you prepared a gift and a bouquet for our meeting? In the midst of Crow's noisy attack, Huaishur moved around the house with a pair of dark circles under his eyes like a walking corpse. He changed his clothes, washed his face, and brushed his teeth. Sitting at the dining table, he sluggishly stuffed the breakfast that Feng Shu brought to him into his mouth and finally drank the whole pot of coffee. Then he looked at the time on the wall. 6:30. Are you crazy? Huaishur was furious. Even if we're going on a date, why the hell are you going on a date at 6:30 in the morning? The park isn't even open yet. Crow didn't even bother with him. At this moment, she was talking to Feng Shu. Feng Shu bent down and handed over a small flower that he picked when he was building the nursery in the morning. He smiled and praised. Today's lady looks exceptionally energetic. Crow took the flower with one wing and looked at Huaishur with an exasperated look. Look at old Feng, look at you, learn from him. Huaishur curled his lips. We're all old foxes. Sister, who are you talking to? Young master, respect for a lady's beauty is a necessary virtue for a gentleman. Feng Shu helped him put on his coat and said. Then, after they took their things, he helped them open the door. Feng Shu's private car was already waiting in the courtyard. Sir, please. The driver, who was wearing a uniform and white gloves, bowed to Huaishur and opened the door for her. Finally, Feng Shu put the bag with sunscreen, umbrella, and coat into the car and nodded to them. I've already booked lunch, flowers, and a cruise to the park for the two of you at Brown's restaurant in the city center. I wish the two of you a happy day. Did you see? How scary can a man be when he's meticulous? Crow sighed softly on Huaishur's shoulder. Learn from him, little brother. If you have 1/3 of old Feng's skills, sister won't have to worry about you being a bachelor for the rest of your life. Huaishur didn't know what to say. He looked at Feng Shu with eyes full of awe. Feng Shu is terrifying. Chapter 105. It was a happy date. Actually, there was no date at all and he was not happy at all. From morning to afternoon, Huai Shi did not have a single moment of rest. Starting from 7:30 a.m., they went to the suburban park, then 9 o'clock a.m., East Plaza, 11 o'clock a.m., South Alley Commercial Street, 1 o'clock a.m., Xin Hai Amusement Park, 3 o'clock a.m., they went boating at the Qing River in the northern suburbs. At 4 o'clock a.m., they walked across the entire Xin Hai and ran to the dock. At 5 o'clock a.m., they ran to the People's Cemetery in the east. Even with a car, he still felt like he was going to die. Not from exhaustion, but from being walked to death by the crow. What kind of crazy person would run a marathon like this for no reason? It was himself. He was so naive that he thought the crow was just talking nonsense and had actually found some clues and brought him along to investigate. But in the end, she just wanted to play with him. In one day he bought a bunch of things. He even bought himself a carved silver birdcage inlaid with mica from the flower and bird market near South Street. What kind of birdcage was that? Would there be a bird in the world that would buy itself a cage? Huai Shi did not know whether she was a woman or not, but she was definitely not a crow. What kind of crow would have half a carton of beer every day and a bucket for supper? Thankfully, Xin Hai was not that big and could be explored in one day. Otherwise, Huai Shi felt like he would have to walk until the next afternoon and not go to school. He wanted to know what kind of medicine she was selling in this birdcage. This is a date, young man. Crow looked around happily. Even though it is tiring, you have to enjoy the process. Come, think back on this fulfilling day and tell me, are you happy? Huai Shi picked up the birdcage and looked at her expressionlessly. What do you think? I think you are not happy at all. That is the fault of not making a date plan in advance. Crow looked at him with pity. But don't worry, I am happy. Just before Huai Shi completely lost his motivation. Finally, he felt the vibration from the Book of Destiny again. He raised his head in astonishment and looked at the bustling building in front of him along with Crow. Now, he was certain that the thing that resonated with the Book of Destiny was in that building. Crow shook his head and sighed. I can only say that your luck is really bad. After searching for clues for a whole day, you only found the place now. I think it must be because one of us is more abnormal. Huai Shi glanced at the dark crow, then stuffed the birdcage into his backpack. The crow skillfully turned into a shadow invisible to ordinary people and stood on his shoulder, commanding him as if he was driving a Gundam. Let's go then, Africa Star. She whistled cheerfully. Look what's waiting for us. In fact, the building was just an ordinary building. Some of them were office buildings, some were hotels, and some were ordinary shopping malls. After all, shopping malls like Renaissance Plaza were common all over the world. Those American businessmen were everywhere. In addition to the shopping mall on the lower floor, the Renaissance Hotel on the top floor was also one of the few five-star hotels in the city. In Xin Hai, it was considered a very high-end place. If this was before, Huai Shi might not even dare to come here and look at the prices outside the display window. But things were different now. After all, his wallet was full, and his identity seemed to have changed. With these prices, he was so confident that he could go in and take a closer look with the thought of not being afraid. Huai Shi walked into the shopping mall with his chest held high. The first floor was cosmetics, the second floor was women's clothing, the third floor was electronic products, the fourth floor was men's clothing, the fifth floor was restaurants, and so on. Initially, Huai Shi was quite nervous. He kept looking left and right, trying to find something strange, but in the end, the Book of Destiny did not move at all. As he walked, he started to scroll through his friend's circle, and like Yu Dongri's selfies in London. That guy. Normally, when he was pretending to say goodbye, he was quite smooth, but when he really wanted to leave, he did not even dare to say goodbye. Because of that, Huai Shi did not have the luxury edition that he had prepared. Now, he could only use it himself. As a result, the nutrition that he had received for the past 2 days could not be distributed. Other than the fat on his stomach, his hair was also growing crazily. "It's here." Just as he was walking casually, Crow suddenly spoke. Huaishe raised his head to look and realized that he had reached the top floor of the shopping mall. Only a gym, a cinema, or a furniture store that took up a lot of space would be opened here. When he followed Crow's line of sight, he saw that behind the cinema, there was a display window of a shop. With his excellent eyesight as a ascender, he was able to discern the exquisite items displayed on the shelves. It appeared to be an antique shop. The items placed on the shelves were more or less old. Even the cabinets themselves were antique furniture with intricate carvings. Be it copper vases, silver knives and forks, jeweled music boxes, or even bone china tableware, they all seemed to reflect the light of money. The pressure was so great that Huaishe found it hard to breathe. "Can't you be more confident? It's just a bunch of old furniture." Crow glanced at this disappointing guy. Huaishe couldn't believe it. "Are you sure it's inside? If you don't believe me, you can take the Book of Destiny and take a look. The reaction will be very strong," Crow said. "However, I don't recommend you do that. After all, when the Book of Destiny reacts, the thing inside will probably also react. Be careful not to alert the enemy." "What exactly is going on?" Huaishe asked. Take a look and you'll know." Crow smiled slyly and kept him in suspense. "I'll go in first to find out what's inside." After saying that, she collapsed into a cloud of gray dust and quickly blended into the air. Other than a phantom that only Huaishe could see, she disappeared without a trace. After all, in addition to her original body, most of her body was made up of a special alchemy ink. Not only could she adjust her color to achieve the effect of optical invisibility, but she also didn't have a physical body. She could turn into a cloud of gray mist at any time. It could be said that she was quite suitable for sneaking in. Huaishe wasn't stupid enough to stand there and wait. He directly turned the corner and walked into the theater. After casually buying a ticket, he walked into the theater and sat in the back row. Holding popcorn and happy drinks, he happily began to wait for the movie to start. In the end, as soon as the dragon flew past in the movie, his vision went dark. He felt that a record from the Book of Destiny was forcefully stuffed into his brain. It was Crow. Through the connection between herself and the Book of Destiny, she actually directly shared what she saw with Huaishe's eyes. At this moment, Crow had already swept past the front desk and the store and quietly entered their warehouse. The first thing he saw was the big iron door that was comparable to a bank vault. There were also 2 guards sitting in front of the iron door. Huaishe was stunned. A broken antique store is so heavily guarded? If it was an antique store, of course it wouldn't be like this, but I'm afraid that this is the Renaissance Plaza's own vault. Don't forget that there are so many companies and such a big hotel upstairs. The valuables must be stored together. Crow calmly said. Moreover, the Renaissance Group is now preparing to open up the reality market. Now it seems that they have fully opened up their stall. In the future, this store will definitely be turned into a place to secretly provide services to ascenders. When I just came in, I also saw an auction house that was being renovated. Maybe there will be an auction house here. The Renaissance Group is also related to the border? How many tycoons in America's Torres Street have nothing to do with the border? Moreover, the Renaissance Group is also a big group at the border. They have monopolized the resources of several large borders and frontline hell. Whether it's origin crystals, border relics, potions, or other things, they can all be found in their market. Crow turned into smoke and slowly seeped into the vault door. He calmly said, "It wouldn't be strange if something related to the Book of Destiny appeared." Huaishe tapped the cover of the Book of Destiny in his hand and flipped it over and over. He couldn't help but ask, "Is this thing a set? Can you please show some respect to the former kingdom of heaven?" Crow helplessly said, That was the place where countless wills returned after they died. It gathered all the value of life. Where have I heard the name Kingdom of Heaven before? Huai sure scratched his head. Does Kingdom of Heaven really exist in this world? That depends on what Kingdom of Heaven is in your heart. The world after death? Huai sure asked tentatively. Haven't you seen so many hells? Crow asked back. Don't you know if the world after death exists? No, in the eyes of normal people, hell is usually a place where bad people go after they die, right? Shouldn't a good person's soul be bathed in holy light, then grow a pair of white wings, fly into the clouds, and sing praises around the gods? Elegies are more like it. These days, the gods are almost all dead. How can they be in the mood to listen to people sing? Crow sneered. Just like how bad people can't go to hell, why sure, good people can't go to heaven either. After a person dies, their consciousness will dissipate along with all the origin substances. After a long cycle, it will return to the silver sea and then scatter into the mortal world again. From beginning to end, Kingdom of Heaven is just a fantasy. There has never been such a gentle place in this world. Crow couldn't help but sigh as if he was deeply moved. No matter how much effort humans put into pursuing miracles, in the end, all they get is an afterimage on the ground. And the so-called Kingdom of Heaven is a product of this. Huai sure didn't understand. Well, since there's still a bit of time, let's talk about some forgotten past. Crow laughed softly, as if he was mocking, but also as if he was reminiscing. A few eras ago, the Astronomical Society had ambitious plans. Relying on the nearly limitless resources obtained from opening up hell, they achieved many miracles. It was as if they had divine authority in their hands. Even the world could be rebuilt. Even when the gods were alive, they had never reached such a peak. It was truly a glorious era. And Kingdom of Heaven was the product of the Astronomical Society's decline. Chapter 106. At the mention of the Astronomy Society at that time, it was necessary to mention the existence of the Utopia, the core of its governance. Before the disappearance of the former president, the Astronomy Society was a giant in the world. The Utopia, the Governing Bureau, the Preservation Institute, the Technical Department, and other institutions under its banner could be said to be a behemoth that could mobilize the world's power at any time. Countless ascended pioneered the development of hell. The technology department formed by scholars absorbed all the wisdom and technology, and then applied and experimented with the countless laboratories of the Continuation Academy. In the end, the results were appropriately and prudently distributed by the Directorate of Governance, benefiting the present. And all of this followed the grand blueprint specified by the Utopia. It would make the world better. At that time, the Astronomy Society began to rely on the pillar of the world's axis to create many miracles. And with the successful exploration and transformation of the Silver Ocean, the next step, the Kingdom of Heaven, was naturally on the agenda. At first, it was an attempt to explore immortality, but it soon became clear that this plan was unrealistic. No, it could be said that it was arrogant. There was no immortal object in the world. Even the gods would face their own decline after 1,000 years, let alone humans. When the first natural enemy died of old age at the border, the exploration of immortality was temporarily put on hold. The Utopia took a step back and searched for a way to resist death. Unfortunately, death could not be resisted. Then, after that, they searched for a way to avoid the losses caused by death. Or rather, how to preserve the value of life. This was the origin of the Kingdom of Heaven. Before the Kingdom of Heaven falls, all the precious wisdom in the world can be preserved before it is lost. Crow's voice was about to completely penetrate the outer shell of the vault, and his tone became vague. After death. Huai sure was puzzled. After a person dies, doesn't the origin form dissipate? It does dissipate, Crow said calmly. But this doesn't prevent a copy from being left behind before death, does it? Huai sure was stunned. Yes, that's right. The so-called kingdom of heaven is not a paradise for souls. It's just a place to store valuable records, a library. Crow chuckled softly. All precious human knowledge and wisdom will be eternally preserved together with the backup. After 3 concessions, this ideal can be realized. Unfortunately, they didn't last long and fell 100 years ago. TSK, that was the battle that made Green Sun famous. Now you know why they are regarded as terrorists, right? Huai Shi was silent for a long time, lowering his head to look at the Book of Destiny. In other words, that's right, if the kingdom of heaven is a library. Crow's tone became meaningful. And the book in your hand is its catalog. Now that it was ringing, it could not be because of anything else. It must be because of the fragment of the kingdom of heaven. If you can obtain it, not only will the Book of Destiny grow stronger, but you will also benefit greatly, right? If you're lucky enough to find a record of military warfare, you don't even need to look for your teacher. But, wouldn't the Astronomy Association hide such a good thing? Some of them are kept, but most of the records have sunk into the depths of hell along with the explosion. I'm afraid they can't be found. However, there should be a considerable number of collections of records active in the present, the border, or hell. As far as I know, the disgraceful Faust was caught. The 3 source poetry collections Byron, Keats, and Shelley were also taken away in advance. Confession, Les Miserables, and Dream of the Red Chamber did not run away at all. They are squatting in the same place and are being kept. I guess they are having a good time now? Crow said, that lazy bastard Moby Dick will definitely hide it and no one can find it. There seems to be news about Rashomon and Maha Maya recently as well. Those guys, none of them are easy to worry about. With your current level, it will be difficult for you to deal with those collections, so don't think about it. I estimate that there are only 1 or 2 fragments here. Even though they have some strange effects, they won't make people think of the former kingdom of heaven. They are still within the scope of your abilities, so you can relax. Huai Shi stared at her for a long time before asking curiously, could it be that you are also? No, I'm not like them. Crow seemed to laugh happily. They are prisoners of fate and I am just a temporary resident. In the blink of an eye, she passed through the door of the vault, ignoring the various security measures as if they were nothing. She suddenly appeared in the tightly sealed vault like mist. Everywhere she looked, she could see the light of origin substances rippling. Dozens of chests were carefully placed on the shelves, layers upon layers of security and verification. In the center of the vault, however, a pair of burning eyes stared covetously at the sudden appearance of Crow. It was a wolfhound. On the stone platform in the middle of the vault, the ferocious hound made of steel seemed to come to life and opened its eyes. It immediately sensed Crow's presence and suddenly stood up. The movement of its torso caused the sharp sound of metal colliding to ring out. It bared its fangs and grinned. But as the mist shrank, Crow appeared and glanced at it. And then, there was no more and then. Its ferocious appearance dissipated. It whimpered a few times before squatting back down. Good dog. Crow nodded in satisfaction and retracted her gaze. When she turned around to look behind her, Huai Shi couldn't help but inhale sharply. Eyes. Behind the tempered glass on the shelves were transparent jars filled with a light green liquid. Floating within the jars were eyeballs. Each jar contained at least 7 or 8 eyeballs. If the first row of jars was included, there were at least 100 eyeballs here. This was only the most horrifying thing. In the last few rows of jars were either hearts or odd-looking animal embryos. At first glance, it was as if they had entered the laboratory of some crazy scientist. The atmosphere was terrifying. What the F***ck is this? Huai Shi almost jumped out of his chair in fright. I didn't come to the cinema to watch this kind of horror movie. It's just a very common organ smuggling. What's the fuss about? Crow glanced at those things and retracted her gaze. Don't worry, most of them aren't human. If you want to say, human eyes are too cheap and have no value at all for border smuggling. On the contrary, the organ tissues of some of the border mutants are in high demand in pharmaceutical research. The supply simply can't meet the demand. Huai Shi swallowed. You just said most, right? Look at what you're saying. Crow was amused. Isn't shoddy goods the most common trick of capitalists? You've already bought shoddy goods. Do you expect them to give you the real thing? That's not what I meant. And my suggestion is that you don't care too much. Crow did not dwell on this topic anymore. She skipped the front row of the shelves and the few items that were obviously relics of the border mutant. Instead, she looked at the flat box in the corner. She suddenly lost her body shape and seeped into the gap of the box. Then, Huai Shi saw a remnant page that was treasured on the red velvet cloth. It seemed to be old. It had already turned yellow and was on the verge of breaking. Various characters were written on it, and one could vaguely see the hand-drawn drawings of the sun, lion, snake, and embryo. I see. I see, Crow smiled happily. Although it said that you had bad luck on the way, you're very lucky when it comes to finding things. This record fragment is perfect for it. What? Upon hearing that there was good stuff, Huai Shi's eyes lit up. An alchemy prescription from hundreds of years ago. I can't tell what it was originally used for, but from the style of the depiction of the angel, it should be the manuscript of Count Street Germain. If you trace it back, there should be a trace of the essence of the jade record. Crow sighed. You've struck gold this time. Before she finished speaking, her body suddenly dissipated and returned to Huai Shi's shoulder. Huai Shi looked back in shock, his smile gradually disappearing. Didn't you say I struck gold? Yes. Crow nodded. Huai Shi's eyes widened. Then why didn't you take it out? Come on, you asked me, a detection ink bottle, to help you steal something. Is there something wrong? Throwing a grenade for you is already the best I can do. Crow rolled her eyes. Even if I want to take it, I have to be able to fly out of the vault with such a big box. Do you think I can do it? I don't even have hands. Then what should I do? Huai Shi was dumbfounded. I've already scouted the way for you. I've opened up your vision. Can't you go by yourself? Crow glared at him with disappointment. Why are you still hesitating? Find a way to King steal it. No. Huai Shi shook his head seriously. If I go, won't I be stealing it? So, it's not a crime if I go. You can steal it if you want. Can't I just pretend that I don't know anything? Huai Shi sighed. Plus, can't we think of a normal way? The last time a similar alchemy formula was auctioned, it was an ancient formula whose authenticity was not confirmed. The final price was 11 million. Crow looked at him out of the corner of her eyes. Are you going to use your head to buy it? So be it, I'll just King steal it. Huai Shi gritted his teeth and reached into his pocket. He wanted to find the mask and balaclava that he had used to commit the crime, but he was stopped by Crow. What's wrong? Crow glanced at him. Do you think someone will start something here in Xin High right after you get out of prison, and you just so happen to appear near the crime scene? Do you think Division Head Fu will pull out his gun and shoot you? Huai Shi finally reacted and suppressed his desire to commit a crime. How about we just forget about it? After all, collecting the fragments of heaven is one of your missions. Logically speaking, you shouldn't give it up. Crow thought about it for a moment and suddenly laughed. But we have to plan for the long term, right? The man and the bird looked at each other. It was a meaningful look. Even though Huai Shi was testing the waters at the edge of room 404, he realized that he was actually quite eager to give it a try. Alibi? He asked in a whisper. Yes. Crow crossed its wings and made a very cartoonish action of thinking. Ai Qing? Impossible. Huai Shi shook his head. She was able to kill me with her own hands. She can't even give false testimony. Fang Shu? You need someone to believe you. Plus, he can't even leave the house. How can he be your evidence? Just as he was deep in thought, Crow suddenly asked curiously, By the way, which day is your school's anniversary this week again? Huaishe raised his eyebrows. The man and the bird looked at each other again. If that's the case, Crow whistled happily, I have a plan. Chapter 107. After returning home, Huaishe and Crow squatted in the basement and discussed until midnight. Then, they began to act separately the next day. It turned out that breaking the law was a technical job, especially when you were being monitored by the authorities. The man and the bird finally decided to divide the work. Crow would prepare the tools for the crime, and Huaishe would be responsible for smoothly and not abruptly joining the school celebration. It was best to be conspicuous, the kind that had hundreds of alibis. These days, even if it was a double cross, there was still a risk of failure. It was always better to find a few more escape routes. This was the first time he was going to double cross. How to pretend that he often committed crimes. Waiting online, it was quite urgent. Huaishe thought about the steps of the entire operation in his heart. He casually pushed open the door of the General Affairs office and skillfully put on a flattering smile. Teacher Gao, about this school celebration. There was an awkward silence in the room. Huaishe stood at the door in a daze. In the dim office with the curtains down, the man lying on the desk panting looked up and was stunned to see the teenager behind him who came in without even knocking. The woman lying on the desk covered her face immediately. In the silence, no one spoke. Huaishe took a step back and closed the door. He looked blankly at the sunlight outside the corridor and scratched his head. Why is it so exciting all of a sudden? He realized that his plan to commit a crime might be aborted. After taking a deep breath, he tried to calm down. He estimated that the two people inside were about to get dressed. He pushed the door open again and pretended that nothing had happened. He smiled flatteringly. Teacher Gao, about this school celebration. The office was still silent. Teacher Gao was still lying on the desk, maintaining the petrified posture just now. He heard the woman lying on the desk ask, Has he left? Damn, why are you in such a good mood? You didn't even put on your clothes after being discovered. Please continue. Just call me when you're done. Huaishe swallowed his saliva, stepped back awkwardly, and considerately closed the door for them. Then, under the afternoon sun, he wiped his sweat and frowned as he thought about how to solve this problem. Since the last time he refused to tutor his nephew's violin lesson, Director Gao of the Academic Affairs Office began to see him as an eyesore. This time, the old and new hatred exploded together. He was afraid that he would be expelled. Why don't I just be a little more vicious and go all the way? I'll grab my phone and rush in to take a few dozen photos. Then, I'll force him to give me the green light and extort a few 100,000. Huaishe gritted his teeth, stomped his foot, and was about to rush in for a round of crazy shooting when he heard a stunned voice behind him. Huaishe. Fu Yi, who was hugging a pile of documents, asked curiously, Why are you here? Take a walk. I'm taking a walk. Huaishe's face twitched. He quickly put away his phone, turned around, and squeezed out a smile at her. What a coincidence. Are you taking a walk too? I'm here to submit the materials and reports that I've prepared for tomorrow's celebration, as well as the list of invited alumni. Fu Yi glanced at him doubtfully. You don't look too good. Did you stay up late last night? Yes, I didn't sleep well. Huaishe smiled awkwardly. Not only did he not sleep well, but he also stayed up until 4 o'clock to plan the crime. Then wait for me for a while. I'll treat you to a Red Bull after I submit the report. Fu Yi wanted to go around Huaishe and enter the door, but Huaishe panicked and quickly blocked her. You can't go in. You can't go in. Huh. Fu Yi tilted her head. What's wrong? Do you believe that there are demons fighting behind the door? Of course, Huaishe couldn't say that. He also didn't want to involve her in this matter. He didn't know what to say. He could only stutter for a long time before awkwardly saying, "Can you stand with me for a while, huh?" Fu Yi became more and more puzzled. Soon, she raised her eyebrows slightly and smiled softly. "Okay." She took a step back, then leaned against the wall next to Huai Shi and stood still. "Is this okay?" she asked. It was as if she really had to stand with Huai Shi as punishment. The wind began to blow quietly. Huai Shi froze for a moment and looked back at her. The afternoon sun shone into the corridor from the window, illuminating the dancing dust and her eyes, which were like amber. Long black hair hung down from her white school uniform. Under the reflection of the sun, the strands seemed to be suffused with fine rays of light. In the moment when Huai Shi was stunned, she suddenly stuffed all the documents in her hand into Huai Shi's arms. Then, she smiled triumphantly as if her prank had succeeded. Huai Shi looked down at the documents in his hand and shook his head. He didn't know why, but he also smiled. Suddenly, it seemed that nothing was important. It was thrown to the back of his mind. He leaned against the wall and looked at the way the sycamore tree swayed in the breeze outside the window. The fine sunlight shone through the shade of the tree and fell on the shoulders of the people coming and going. It was so quiet that it was like a bubble. He let out a long breath. The anxiety that had been lingering in his heart these days seemed to disappear with it. He became calm and peaceful again, as if he had just woken up from a long dream. Soon, he heard footsteps behind the door. A woman pushed the door open and saw the two people outside the door. She smiled awkwardly. Director Gao sent her out with a thermos box in his hand. "I'll go back for lunch in the future. It's not good to let the students see you send me lunch all the time." After saying a few words, he sent her away. Director Gao looked back at the two people at the door, especially the embarrassed Huai Shi. He said as if explaining, "My wife." "Oh." Huai Shi nodded in a hurry. "The report and list of names for the school anniversary party? Just give it to me." He took the stack of documents from Huai Shi's hands and looked at Fu Yi. "Remember to send an electronic version to Principal Zhao's email later. It's the school's 70th anniversary celebration. At least let him approve more of the budget." Fu Yi nodded with a smile. "Also, the idea for the micro-movie is good, but the program for the school anniversary party." Director Gao calmly lowered his head and flipped through the list Fu Yi handed over. He looked up and asked, "Is it a little too little?" Fu Yi seemed to have a plan. Because most of the third-year students are preparing for the college entrance examination, there are a lot of first-year students' programs, but the quality is not very high. "Okay, then I'll help you think." Director Gao looked back at Huai Shi. "Aren't you good at the cello? You seem to have won a lot of awards. You should also come up with a program and let everyone see the artistic style of our school." Fu Yi was stunned for a moment and said subconsciously, "Teacher Gao, Huai Shi has been preparing for the professional level exam recently, and he has already passed the rehearsal. It's okay. I think he's quite free running around every day. Didn't he take a long leave a while ago? Isn't it good to have the energy to contribute to the school? Isn't that right?" He glanced at Huai Shi meaningfully. "He's in his third year of high school and is about to graduate. Whether it's entering society or entering university, you have to learn to be more steady and cautious. Don't rush around in a hurry." Then, he said to Fu Yi, "I'll leave this matter to you. Isn't there a stand-up comedian hospitalized? You can fill the position." Huai Shi was stunned and his mood suddenly became a little complicated. On one hand, it was because the purpose of his trip seemed to have been suddenly solved. He didn't even need to say anything. Also, Director Gao didn't seem to want to silence him or threaten him. He just gave him a light warning. It could be said that he was quite relaxed and happy. On the other hand, it was Fu Yi. The reason why he came to find Director Gao and didn't choose to directly find Fu Yi, who was in charge of this matter in the student union, was that he didn't want to involve her. Even if she didn't know that he was perjuring himself, why should he involve her? This feeling of using a friend made him feel a little uncomfortable. In the end, he nodded helplessly. Okay, since you said so, I'll perform a solo. Originally, he just planned to get a position in the school choir as an accompaniment. Now, it seemed that he had to take some risk. After handing in the information, Fu Yi looked at him strangely. Solo? You're just going to leave me alone? Just a solo. Huaishe nodded as if he didn't understand what she meant. After all, if I want to sing the opera again, there won't be enough time for rehearsal, right? TSK, I always feel like you're up to something. Fu Yi took out 2 cans of Red Bull from under the vending machine and didn't pursue the matter. She just threw one to him. Remember not to stand me up at the rehearsal tonight. Definitely. Huaishe pulled the tab and drank it in one gulp. The first step of the criminal plan, done probably. The so-called school anniversary was just that. The leaders would give a speech, then the successful alumni would come out to give a speech, the students would choose a representative to give a speech according to the script, and then it would enter the popular donation segment. Finally, there would be a cultural performance to show the leaders and successful people from all walks of life that the money wasn't given in vain. While the school leaders led everyone on a tour of the school, the auditorium backstage was also busy. The school anniversary performance was about to begin and people were coming and going. Dozens of students were busy preparing props and final rehearsals. The cameraman from the TV station was also adjusting the lights and camera positions. Everyone seemed to have work to do. As a result, the crowd gathered in the corner became an eyesore. Huaishe, your skin is a lot better. Really? I recommend you use the latest night cream from Peppermint. It's super effective. Look at your skin. Do you just casually wipe your face every time after washing it? You can't do that. It'll hurt your skin. Really? I didn't even notice. Huaishe, are you going to perform this time too? Yeah, a solo. You have to give me a round of applause. Hey, by the way, did you change your bracelet? This turquoise looks pretty good. It'll be good with an agate. Turquoise and agate are both good for sleep. Look at the skin under your ear. It's a bit oily. It's because you don't sleep well. Really? Really? I've been preparing for the math competition. I've been staying up late for a long time. I recommend you use this steam eye mask. It's very good for reducing dark circles. Put it on for 5 minutes before bed. Combined with the essence I just recommended, you won't even have acne when you wake up the next morning. Huh? Really? Huaishe, your phone keeps ringing. It's nothing. Maybe someone is looking for me. In the girls' group, Huaishe lowered his head and glanced at his phone. He smiled wickedly at his new friends. I'll go to the piano room to get something first. Talk later. Okay. Under the reluctant gazes of the girls, the young man, who seemed to have transformed into a lover of the masses, turned around and walked towards the piano room. Along the way, he shook his head carelessly, whistled, and then opened the door of the piano room. He saw an expressionless face. Is it fun? The real Huaishe asked. Chapter 108. Hey, why are you in such a rush? Huaishe, who had just been smiling wickedly, reached out and pulled his head off his neck, revealing Crow, who was sitting inside. She looked at Huaishe and blinked her eyes proudly. School life is pretty good. Even I want to transfer to another school to attend classes. Please, sister, just temporarily replace me for half a day. Don't give me any trouble. Huaishe shook his head bitterly as he scrutinized her current appearance. What's going on? Just some simple alchemy. Crow whistled. It is all thanks to Ol Fong for helping me find the oldest plastic model in Xian Hai. After some slight modification, after filling in the power system and the illusion shell, and covering it with the record of your appearance, everything is done. As she spoke, she smiled happily. Don't forget what my original body is. Things had taken a different turn. In reality, the face that she was currently impersonating, as well as the skin that was exposed outside of the clothes, were all drawn by her using the quill that she had turned into. Thanks to the detailed records of Huai Shi in the Book of Destiny, she only needed to cover it up. Even though there were no origin substance fluctuations, as long as she didn't stick too closely to it, most people wouldn't be able to tell that there was anything wrong with it. Then what about the performance later? Huai Shi asked. I remember that you don't know how to play the cello, right? Who doesn't know how to pretend? Crow controlled the model as if she were driving a Gundam. She pulled up the clothes, revealing the empty stomach and the tape recorder that was stuffed inside. As long as she moved her hand slightly, the recorder would begin to emit the melodious sound of a cello. Also, to make up for the lack of effect, I even prepared a mysterious mechanism. Don't worry about it. As she spoke, she picked up Huai Shi's cello and waved it in front of him proudly. However, Huai Shi still felt like there was something wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Very quickly, they heard impassioned music coming from the direction of the auditorium. It was the melody of the opening mini-movie, Page's Hero. Alright, you don't have time to waste. The performance has already begun. Crow pointed to the backpack in the corner of the piano room. Later, I'll go out and wander around the backstage for a while. You put on your equipment and go out from here. 10 minutes on the road, 10 minutes on the job, 10 minutes on the road, 10 minutes on the job, and 10 minutes on the road back. If you're lucky, you'll be able to play the zither before I replace you. Huai Shi looked at her suspiciously. Are you sure there won't be any problems? Don't worry, would I lie to you? Crow patted his chest and laughed happily. Then, Huai Shi felt even worse. But time was indeed running out. He didn't dare to waste any more. He raised his head and drank all the potions that Crow gave him, one by one. He could only feel the sweetness, bitterness, and spiciness bursting out from the bottom of his heart at the same time. His face had already begun to change shape and soften rapidly, but his height had also begun to increase. In the end, his height had increased by 15 centimeters, and his facial features had almost completely disappeared. Fortunately, he had changed into loose clothes in advance. Otherwise, he would have looked extremely funny. He took out the heavy coat that Crow prepared from his backpack and put it on his body. Then, he pulled up the retractable collar around his neck and put it on his face. Finally, he put on the sunglasses and the hood. Even his hands were hidden in anti-cut glove. He looked very professional. I'll be back soon. Huai Shi carried his backpack and jumped out of the window. While no one was paying attention, he bypassed the surveillance cameras and ran in the direction of Renaissance Square. Soon, his figure disappeared from the roofs and could no longer be seen. It looks like he hasn't reacted yet. Crow watched him go with a happy smile. Then, she looked down at the head in her arms and couldn't help but whistle again. I always feel that he can do a lot of things with this face. After all, time was short. 10 minutes later, Huai Shi stood on the roof, panting. When he looked back, he could no longer see the shadow of the school. Along the way, he deeply understood the benefits of the Een Soul stigmata. When he ran with all his strength, he only felt that the scene in front of him was constantly passing behind him. With the power of the rope of sorrow, he ran wildly between the tall buildings. The gray coat was the same color as the cement. It was not noticeable at all if you were far away. Coupled with the city's surveillance distribution given by Crow, no one noticed that Huai Shi had come to the building opposite Renaissance Square and was ready to start the crime plan. But how was she so familiar with the city's surveillance cameras? Huai Shi scratched his chin and looked down at his watch. He still had 20 minutes. 10 minutes to work, 10 minutes to retreat. In theory it was enough. Crow was afraid that he would be inexperienced for the first time, so she had drawn up a number of backup plans and contingency measures for each step. She was simply teaching him how to be a criminal boss step by step. How to say it felt quite good. The plan was flawless. Now there was only the most critical step left. Huai leaned on the edge of the building and looked down at the traffic on the road. The vault was in the center of the Renaissance building. In order to avoid leaving any information in the surveillance, he couldn't go up from below. The hotel above had complete security measures, so he had no room to sneak in. So, there was only one way left: break through from the center. The height of the building opposite Renaissance Square was exactly the same as the floor where the vault was located. In other words, Huai had to find a way to get in from here. Crow gave several suggestions, but the first one was to jump directly to the window of the toilet and then carry out the plan before the other side could react. Using a rope was too eye-catching, and the other side had no place to borrow strength. The tempered glass was smooth. According to the mark on the map, the distance between the two buildings was about 10 meters. But before this, the longest distance recorded by ordinary people was 9 meters. It was time to test his jumping ability. No matter how I look at it, it looks like jumping off the building. Huai hesitated for half a minute, and finally chose to believe in Crow. After stuffing all the items in the backpack into his pocket, he tried to jump twice in place. After making sure that nothing was thrown out, he retreated to the edge of the building, bent down, and stared at the target window. Deep breath. He felt his violent heartbeat gradually calming down. Following his will, the muscles of his limbs contracted and relaxed orderly. In the end, he was completely relaxed. At that moment, Huai opened his eyes wide and ran forward with all his might. Boom! Under his feet, the raised cement on the edge of the building suddenly shook and almost cracked under this step. And Huai had already rushed out. Stepping on the ground under his feet, he galloped toward the cliff dozens of meters high in front of him. Like a cannonball, he broke the wind in front of him. In a suppressed roar, he finally stepped on the guardrail under his feet, jumped from the edge of the building, and flew into the sky. There was a moment of stagnation. Huai looked around with the corner of his eyes, peeking at the countless people and cars under his feet, peeking at the birds hovering in the wind, and a drop of rain falling from the sky. Huai flew over the heads of the birds, broke through the rain, and flew forward. It was like flying. For a moment, he was above the sky. Gravity, the earth, and everything else were left behind. He gained indescribable freedom and couldn't help but roar in excitement. The wind blew in his face. In this dog-eat-dog operation, he actually found a kind of joy in doing evil. But at that moment, he suddenly remembered something in his mind. Wait, why did I double-cross them? If they were really involved in border smuggling, why did I sneak in to steal? I'm an officer of the Astronomical Association. Wouldn't it be better to ask the Special Affairs Division to break in? F***ck, I was tricked by that woman again. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and the layer of blue glass in front of him quickly magnified. At that moment, Huai roared, echoing the thunder bursting from the dark clouds above his head. The source flame in his hand ignited. The axe of wrath slashed down. Bang! Countless glass shards flew from the outside to the inside. In the loud noise, Huai waved his hand, and the rope popped out, hung in the room, and pulled him across the last distance. He landed with a bang. The reason why it was a bang was because he seemed to have bumped into someone. Huai looked down in shock and saw the figure under his feet. The huge force from the sky knocked the peeing security guard unconscious in an instant. He was unconscious on the spot. Sorry. Huai lifted his foot awkwardly. Just treat it as your punishment for peeing so much outside the pool. Before the chaos spread, he rushed out in the direction of the vault. There was no turning back. As for the rest of the score, he would go back and settle it with Crow. However, he didn't expect that his criminal plan was facing a huge crisis on the other side. 5 minutes ago, on the busy backstage, Director Gao, who came to patrol, walked around with his hands behind his back and frowned. Where's Huai? It's so messy here. Doesn't he know how to help? I don't know, I just saw him here. I saw him. He said he went to the piano room to get something and hasn't come back yet. Director Gao heard this and suddenly became more and more unhappy. With a gloomy face, he walked straight in the direction of the piano room with his hands behind his back. It seemed that the punishment 2 days ago was not enough. If this kid was so slippery, he had to give him a little more severe warning. As he pondered over his punishment, he pushed open the door and said with a cold expression, "Why sure, you." An awkward silence suddenly came. In the silence, Director Gao looked at the scene in the room, stunned. He opened his mouth and wanted to scream, but only a hoarse sound came out of his throat. "What's the matter?" On the chair in the piano room, the young man held a cigarette in his left hand. He seemed to be smoking happily, so happy that he even took his head off his neck. He held it in his arms, but his eyes glanced in the direction of the visitor, and his lips opened and closed. "Hey, why didn't you knock?" Accompanied by his words, a trace of scarlet liquid seeped out of the cut on his neck and slowly dripped to the ground, making a crisp sound. You, Director Gao's lips trembled, and his legs went soft. He almost sat on the ground. His face was pale, and he said incoherently, "You don't be afraid, I'll call 120, I'll call." Before he finished speaking, his eyes rolled and he fainted. Soon, a small head came out of the gap in his neck, and there was a can of Fong Shu's freshly squeezed strawberry juice on her wings. Looking at the unconscious Director Gao on the ground, she couldn't help but sigh. This is troublesome. Chapter 109. She watched Director Gao pass out. Crow immediately controlled Huai Shi Mk2 to close the door, then squatted down to look at the unconscious middle-aged man on the ground, and began to consider whether to silence him. It was not difficult to make him disappear from the face of the earth. But on the same day as Wan Li's accident, the suspect Huai Shi went missing from his school. The directivity was a bit too obvious. So, she could only change his consciousness through hypnosis. No matter what, she could not let him continue to lie here. Soon, Crow, who had finished thinking, put on her helmet again, then opened the cabinet in the piano room, and pulled Director Gao's body inside. The body's power system was still too weak, and she almost could not move a person. Just as she gritted her teeth and tried to pull Director Gao's legs into the box, the door suddenly opened. Fu Yi struggled to pull a pile of props into the door. "Why sure, Director Gao just asked you backstage, would you be caught by him?" Dead silence, an awkward dead silence. In the silence, Huai Shi Mk2 looked at Fu Yi in astonishment. Fu Yi also stared blankly at the teenager, who seemed to be dragging a body into the box, and was stunned. To tell you the truth," Huai Shi Mk2 turned his head stiffly and said, "He has a heatstroke." Fu Yi was even more incredulous. Looking at the blood-red liquid mixed with tomato juice and strawberry jam on the ground, she seemed to finally understand something, and her face became pale. But the moment she reacted, she immediately closed the door behind her. She looked at Huai Shi in a daze, gasping for breath. "No, that..." Crow was hesitating whether to explain or use the drug to knock her out, but suddenly heard Fu Yi's trembling voice. I'll go to the chemistry laboratory to help you get the strong acid. You're going to destroy the body without saying anything, aren't you a bit too much? Is this your family's history or your talent?" Crow, who was hiding in her neck, was stunned and hurriedly stopped her. "No. He really has a heat stroke." After explaining for a long time, Fu Yi seemed to finally understand something. She forced a smile and sat on the chair. She couldn't help but touch her pocket, but she couldn't find a cigarette. "By the way, I'm here to tell you something." She slapped her head and finally remembered. She looked at Huai Shi and said, "It's time for you to go on stage." Okay. Crow looked at her worriedly, picked up the cello and walked out of the door. But he heard Fu Yi's puzzled voice behind him. "The weather is so hot. Why are you wearing high-collared clothes?" "My neck is cold." Huai Shi Mk2 raised his hand and touched the seam under his collar before closing the door behind him. Next, it was time to perform. She knocked on the hidden buckle in the piano case, suddenly feeling somewhat expectant. 5 minutes ago, a black motorcade stopped in the parking lot of Renaissance Plaza. The person in charge had been waiting there for a long time. Before the car stopped, he had already gone up. Before he could speak, a pale-skinned middle-aged man stepped out of the car. "Is the security ready?" "It's been ordered." The person in charge nodded hurriedly. "Is the delivery so urgent this time, Mr. Clement?" "No, everything else is here," Clement said. "The headquarters is very interested in the formula you bought a few days ago. We need to send it back immediately. Please lead the way, sir." "Okay, follow me." The person in charge turned and walked to the elevator. But before the elevator opened, a shrill alarm rang. Clement's expression changed drastically. Weisher felt that he was done for. He didn't know that he had been exposed, nor did he know that someone was going to use his face to start trouble. Originally, he had already rushed directly into the vault through the internal passage, and then knocked the 2 guards unconscious before they could react. But he didn't expect to trigger a mechanism somewhere, and the alarm instantly rang. Now that the vault was right in front of him, it was impossible to leave. He had to at least try to break in. Weisher hurriedly took out 2 tubes of reagents and a flask prepared by Crow from his pocket. After pouring them in, he carefully mixed in a few packets of powder. Then, according to the instructions, he began to shake it vigorously. He didn't even bring a gun this time, so naturally, it was impossible to bring explosives. These days, even the street thugs knew that once guns and explosives were used, the nature of the situation would change from indefinite to indefinite, and from indefinite to dead. If the Special Affairs Division said that astronomy would take care of this, what would Weisher do then? Investigate himself? Therefore, although Crow didn't have any difficulty in making explosives, in the end, he still recommended a more efficient method: universal dissolving agent. To be precise, it was a degraded version made for metal. After all, how could the group of alchemists easily produce something that they had been pursuing for thousands of years? It was a scavenger that could even dissolve stigmata and miracle. And this time, what Crow made was a byproduct of the process of exploring this power. It was also a reagent that alchemists used to remove impurities during key smelting processes. Because it was too dangerous for ordinary people to use, Crow's instructions and explanations were frighteningly thick. But in short, there were 2 points. First, pour it into a piece and shake it wildly. The more evenly the 2 reagents were mixed, the better. Second, when you see the light, you should quickly let go, don't burn yourself. In the flask, the nature of the 2 reagents seemed to be quite stable, without the slightest intention of mixing. They were still clearly separated. Even under Weisher's sublimated hand speed, after being single for 17 years, there was still any dispersion. Even if thousands of strands were mixed together like a ball of wool, there was still no other color. But with Weisher's violent shaking, the mixed powder began to quickly turn red, like boiling iron filings emitting bursts of high temperature. In a flash, the liquid in the flask began to boil. Under the effect of shaking and boiling, the increasingly diluted reagent finally couldn't maintain its independent nature. For a moment, the 2 slender strands of color gently touched one another. It was like a handshake. Then, a terrifying light burst out from the dust. In a flash, like an electric current, it filled the entire flask, rushing from the boiling colors. The moment he reacted, Weisher threw the flask to the iron door in front of him. But at that moment, the mist emitted from the self-dissolving flask had already corroded Weisher's glove. He quickly took them off and threw them on the ground. The traces of corrosion were still spreading, until the entire glove was burned into a pile of mud. And with the completion of the reaction, the white mist from the self-exploding flask had completely engulfed the iron door. In the mist, only the quiet sound of water could be heard. Like honey dripping from a tree, there was a viscous liquid flowing. Fortunately, under normal temperature, the all-dissolving reagent, metal version could not maintain its nature and this miracle for a long time. It would dissipate with rapid degradation, and in the end, only sulfur and salt would be left. Soon, the rolling mist dissipated, leaving only a pungent smell. Huaishur had already changed into a gas mask and new gloves. After the mist dissipated, he only saw the floor and ceiling riddled with holes. And where the vault's door was originally, a huge crack had silently appeared like a melting glacier. Countless melted and solidified molten iron still maintained its flowing shape, looking like mud made of iron. And Huaishur in an instant rushed into the vault. Time waited for no man. The fierce dog in the vault had awakened, and it had to be dealt with before it attacked and reacted. This kind of puppet made by the Border Workshop was powered by origin crystal. It was usually used to guard and warn important items. Due to its wide range of applications, the number of branches derived was also frightening. There were hundreds of models of this size, and among them, there were also different configurations such as the poor version, the economical version, and even the deluxe version. If it was the most powerful kind, even a rank 3 sublimator could be bitten to pieces. The weakest kind could only be called a human. And according to Crow's judgment, this kind of hound puppet was the most common type of guard. Its body was hard and strong, and it was not afraid of pain. Its weakness was that it did not have a strong defense against origin crystal attack. This kind of puppet should have been easy for Huaishur. But it was not. Don't you think your current characteristics are obvious enough? Crow asked. If you take out the axe and deal with it, you'll immediately become a wanted person, okay? Fortunately, she had already found a solution to this problem. Huaishur flipped his hand and pulled out the third test tube from the medicine pouch on his waist, throwing it at the steel hound that was pouncing towards him. Immediately afterwards, he pulled up the collar of his jacket and covered his face. The test tube broke on the steel, and immediately afterwards, a storm and cold gushed out from it. White waves of air instantly swallowed the hound in midair. Immediately afterwards, a bone-piercing chill spread through the air as the hound fell. Wherever the cold wave passed, there was a continuous sound of explosions. It was the sound of the glass jars on the shelves shattering. Whether it was the eyeballs, the heart, or the tendons, all the organs of the border mutants were instantly sealed in ice. And the hound could no longer move. In an instant, the temperature dropped to the extreme, causing it to be frozen into a lump of ice. It fell to the ground, cracking open the cracks. Immediately afterwards, Huaishur pulled out a hammer from his tool bag and smashed it down on the hound's head. Bang! The extreme cold that was enough to instantly freeze a tank's armor took away all of the metal's toughness. Under the hammer's strike, the hound's head fell apart, shattering into pieces on the ground, revealing the complicated mechanism and broken gears within. Done. Huaishur's movements were quick. He rushed to the deepest part of the treasury, grabbed the frozen box, and smashed it on the spot. Then, he stuffed the formula inside into his clothes. In the blink of an eye, he heard a mournful cry behind him. The sound of something breaking through the air burst forth. Chapter 110. Amidst the sudden chill, Huaishur rolled abruptly in an attempt to dodge. But he still felt pain on his back. The opponent's movements were surprisingly fast, and the jacket embedded with layers of iron wires and protection was almost penetrated by this blow. After the first strike, another strike followed. The sound of air being torn apart exploded again. Huaishur threw the hammer without looking back and turned to hide behind the shelf. Then, there was the sharp sound of metal being pierced. Then, he roared with all his strength and pushed the entire shelf behind him. In an instant, there was a loud crash on the ground, and there was a continuous sound of shattering. The attacker quickly retreated, his body surrounded by wisps of scarlet mist. On his pale face, his eyes shot out a bloody light. In his left hand was a slender cavalry saber. It was the weapon that had almost pierced through Huaishur's body. A sublimator. Huaisher clicked his tongue unhappily. The situation had entered the worst situation of the plan. He was blocked by a Renaissance group sublimator. In fact, it was reasonable for such a vault to be guarded by a sublimator, so it was not unexpected. It could only be said that his luck was terrible. Encountering such a strong enemy skilled in swords and sabers, Huaisher subconsciously wanted to take out his axe and jump. He was delighted. But in order to hide his identity, he did not dare to take out his weapon. Otherwise, he would be wanted by a 5 stars before he even left. Fortunately, Crow had already made a plan to deal with this situation. As he pulled his hand at his waist, the liquid bag hidden under his jacket instantly shattered, and the sticky liquid instantly flowed down from the back of his hood and covered his whole body in an instant. At that moment, Huaisher reached out to his chest and secretly stuffed a dust of the liberated in. In the next moment, the darkness erupted, and flames burst out from his body, rising in an instant and enveloping him. But this time, the flames turned into a blazing scarlet. It was like dancing blood. The color was changed. Not only that, but the iron skeleton buried in his coat also protruded. It was as if his entire body was enveloped in burning rattan armor. It was a very strange sight. Under the gas mask, his eyes were quickly covered by darkness. Druid pedigree, grade 2 stigmata, Willow Man. As if, at best, it was just a counterfeit version that was only good on the surface. It only looked scary, but in reality, it did not have the destructive power of the rumored willow stick men. The flames were just a mixture of volatile potions to change the color. In reality, they did not have any destructive power at all. His current persona was that of an alchemist from Rome, and he could not afford to lose it. Romans. Clement was stunned for a moment, and his face turned gloomier. Eat shit Latin. Before his voice died away, the extremely skilled Russian Federation army knife technique had already slashed toward Huaisher's head. What the **CK are you talking about? How much hatred did they have for Rome? Not only did the stigmata of the Druid pedigree not force the other party to hold back, but it also had a taunting effect, which directly made the other party go berserk. In desperation, Huaisher did not dare to play the trick of catching the blade with his bare hands. He could only start running and dodging in the narrow and complicated terrain of the vault. Fortunately, the layers of shelves were densely packed, or Huaisher would have been forced into a corner and hacked to death. In his panic, his eyes lit up, and he jumped with all his might, picked up the box on the top shelf, and threw it at Clement. Clement roared, and his cavalry knife slashed down, cutting the box and the goods inside into pieces. "Coward! Face me!" he roared at Huaisher in Slavic. "I won't!" Huaisher spoke Latin, which he learned from the red gloves, and swung the bottles on both sides at him. "You, a Russian Federation ascendant, work for the Americans, and you have the nerve to look down on others." Taking advantage of the moment when Clement's footsteps paused, Huaisher finally approached his target. It was the border relic lying in the middle of the shelf. It was an ancient flail that looked ancient. The handle, which was the length of an ordinary person's arm, was connected to a blood-red chain, and at the other end where the mace was originally, there was a head carved with countless sharp snake hair. He really didn't know where this thing had been dug out from. That enchanting face still had traces of the ferocious and painful expression before death. Seeing Huaisher reaching for the banshee's skull, Clement not only did not panic, but a trace of mockery appeared on his face. Among the border relics stored in the vault, the banshee's skull was indeed the highest grade, A, but this did not mean that Huaisher could use it freely without the liberation language. Moreover, in addition to the protection of the vault, all the border relics carried the curse and insurance measures set by the alchemists. If no manager came into contact with them before the customer used them, they would be more lethal than red-hot charcoal. If he directly used his hands to grab it, once the protection was triggered, even if he wore gloves, he would be burned to ashes. But in the next moment, he was dumbfounded. Because Huaishur actually took out a tube of potion from his pocket and smashed it on the flail. The dark green liquid instantly seeped into the flail. Then, he placed his hand on the handle and easily took the weapon from the shelf. There was no backlash. Mistletoe. Huaishur grinned proudly. This was one of the insurance left by Crow. If he entered a dangerous situation, he might have to use the materials on the spot. In order to bypass the restrictions on the border relics, she used up the few precious resources and a large amount of origin substance to extract 30 grams of the finished product from a large barrel of potion. The reason why it was named mistletoe was because it could bypass all restrictions and directly parasitize the target's root system, becoming a part of it. This was a rare fusion agent. Its main purpose was to completely fuse two precious alloys that were incompatible with each other. However, after being modified by Crow and Huaishur's confining hand, this strange effect was created. Huaishur would place his origin substance on his palm and melt it into a metallic shape, while the mistletoe was responsible for fusing the two metals into one. The final result was that Huaishur was determined to be a part of the Banshee's skull by the anti-theft restriction. The combination of man and hammer sounded extremely awe-inspiring. Even if he didn't use the release language to let the Banshee's skull release its original petrification strike, it was enough to make this bastard who was chasing him suffer. Without waiting for Clement to react, Huaishur took a step forward and swung the handle in his hand, smashing the Banshee's skull towards Clement's head. As the flail flew through the air, the two of them couldn't help but feel their legs go weak, their faces red and their hearts beating fast. The reason was that this thing didn't let out a sharp whistle, but a gentle moan that made people's hearts itch. The sound would even change according to Huaishur's strength. It was like suddenly opening a porn film and then pulling it to the end. It was a complete mental pollution. Clement, the security guard, had never heard of this effect. He didn't know what to do and was almost smashed in the face. However, Huaishur wasn't embarrassed. At first, he was a little scared, but after accepting this setting, how should he put it, his heart itched and he wanted to listen for a while longer. "Stop, don't go." Huaishur pressed on. "Let this grandpa hit you 800 times. As he spoke, he suddenly swung his arm down, and the Banshee's skull swept towards him. Clement was furious. He didn't care about the difference in quality, and used the cavalry sword in his hand to block the hammer of the flail. In an instant, sparks flew and a hole appeared on the military sword. The fact that it didn't break on the spot meant that it was hard enough. Immediately after, within 3 steps, Clement suddenly raised his eyes and roared. He looked at Huaishur. A dazzling flash burst out from his eyes and shot straight into Huaishur's pupils. At that moment, a pair of wings spread out from his back, revealing the original appearance of his stigmata. American Genealogy, Level 2 Stigmata, Gargoyle. The American genealogy was also known as the heterogeneous genealogy. The biggest reason was that most of the ascendants who formed the American genealogy were borderline heterogeneous stigmatas, such as vampires, werewolves, ghouls, and other demi-humans who were regarded as dark races in the Middle Ages. Therefore, the American genealogy was regarded as a heterogeneous group. Clement, who was hired by Renaissance, had evolved into the most famous gargoyle. It not only had amazing defensive power, but also had the talent skill, Eyes of Hatred. As an evil beast and guardian spirit, the gargoyle had existed for a long time. In the legends, it was rumored that the gargoyle punished evil. With this as the source, the Eyes of Hatred developed from the gargoyle was a judgment against the enemy. In the legends, it could summon the people who had been killed by the enemy to avenge the enemy, but in reality, the effect was not so mysterious. Perhaps after evolving into a level 5 fallen morning star, a casual glance could make people fall into hell. However, a level 2 gargoyle was at best a low-level slum. Its purpose was to use its gaze as a medium to attack the enemy's consciousness. It would sift out the most profound strand of resentment from the enemy's body and bestow it with its own origin substance, causing the deceased to temporarily take on a ghost-like form to retaliate against the enemy. In a short period of time, it would form an effect of 2 against 1, and it could be used to suppress and win in battle. The moment he was seen, Huai Shi's mind was filled with the effects of the stigmata that the crow had forced him to memorize. When he felt the source substance in his body going berserk, he naturally knew what this thing was. He was immediately alarmed and scared out of his wit. The most hated person among the people who had died by his hand would turn into a vengeful spirit to claim his life. Forget about the red gloves. If it was a Hulua, he would not be able to do it at all. He was already unable to deal with one, how could he fight another? But then, he saw a resentful scream coming from the thick fog that rose up. An old face emerged from the fog. Chi-Wan, with a distorted face, used the resentment he had left behind to return to the world once again, and launched his revenge on Huai Shi. Then there was no then. Chapter 111. The entire process could be simply divided into 3 steps. Chi-Wan appeared, Chi-Wan leapt forward, Chi-Wan disappeared. Don't forget that Huai Shi's body was still on fire. Even if the color had changed, its essence hadn't changed. The flames that had fused with large amounts of ash and negative origin substance were basically a furnace of souls. Even if Chi-Wan had been alive, he would have definitely died if he leapt at it, let alone a hastily created imitation. This time, it wasn't just Huai Shi. Even Clement was shocked. He didn't expect that the large amount of origin substance he had spent to summon such a troublesome thing. He didn't know that the flames on Huai Shi's body had the ability to burn origin substance. He only saw that the incomparably resentful old man seemed to have disappeared after bumping into Huai Shi. It was as if his wish had been fulfilled, and he had ascended to heaven. In other words, the biggest sin this guy had committed in his life was at most spitting on someone's shoe for no reason? Where did this King Saint come from? Are you stupid? I'm a friend of justice. Huai Shi reacted and instantly laughed loudly. Hiding the cold sweat on his back, he charged at Clement again. Immediately afterwards, the banshee's skull came crashing down with a groan. The cavalry blade cracked. He didn't expect that the killing move that he had used up most of his origin substance to be useless. Clement's reaction was momentarily delayed, and the cavalry blade in his hand fell out of his hand after shattering. Immediately afterwards, he saw Huai Shi turn the handle of the hammer and smash the sharp end of the flail towards him. His expression suddenly changed. He took a step back and steadied himself, instinctively reaching out to block the flail. But immediately afterwards, he felt that the flail was weak. Huai Shi didn't use any strength at all. It was as if he had just greeted him lightly. Then, he let go of his hand. He allowed Clement to snatch the flail away. Oh no! In that instant, Clement seemed to see a mocking smile under the gas mask. When the sound of the piano rang out, the alumni in the front row of the auditorium were still smiling. After the polite applause, they continued to chat with each other about the previous topic. It was related to investments, options, or the hidden matters behind the recent minor changes in the department. The youngest person sitting here was already close to 40 years old. After experiencing so many storms, to be honest, he didn't really care for such a small scene like his alma mater. He was more interested in enjoying the atmosphere and reliving the memories of the past. A few of them seemed to have noticed the young man playing the zither on the stage and nodded slightly. Feng Ning, look at this one. She's quite good-looking and has a good image. Indeed, with some training, he does have the potential to debut. If there's a chance in the future, we can get in touch with him. The graceful woman nodded slightly and looked at the old man beside her. I don't know much about the zither. What do you think, Mr. Zhao? Beside him, the old man who was peeling oranges with his head lowered paused for a moment as if he was listening. Soon, he couldn't help but frown. The zither won't work. The smile on the principal's face stiffened, and he felt a little awkward. He didn't know how he had offended this senior. Zhao Yu was 74 years old this year. In terms of qualifications, he was twice as experienced as his father. As early as 30 years ago, he was a professor at the Doomsday Music Academy, a famous violinist in the country, and a master of string theory. In the classical music industry, even if one's life and death couldn't be decided with a single word, such an evaluation was too cruel for Huaishe, a young man who was ambitious in the field of music. I mean, the zither won't work. After peeling the oranges, the old man didn't eat them. He just put them on the paper towel and piled them up like a small mountain. As if he understood the principal's uneasiness, he explained. His foundation is very good. He's a good seedling, but the zither isn't good. Later, I'll remind him not to use the factory brand anymore. He'll ruin himself. The principal breathed a sigh of relief, wiped his sweat, and explained to Mr. Zhao, "He's a tough kid. It's not easy for him to persevere until today." He was about to explain something, but he saw Mr. Zhao raise his hand and wave it. Mr. Zhao, who had been looking down, finally raised his eyes and looked at the stage. It's useless to say more. Mr. Zhao stared at the young man with his white eyes and seemed to be serious. Let's listen first. From that moment on, the faint noise and clamor under the stage gradually disappeared. In the end, it turned into silence, because the melody had gradually sounded. It was hard to imagine that the indescribable sound of the zither was full of emotions. It was like a surging spring, with a slight coldness and softness spreading from the feet. Winter. Mr. Zhao's eyebrows slightly raised, and his expression gradually became serious. Vivaldi's Four Seasons Concerto was indeed a classic piece in the cello. But the more classic it was, the more it had been bound by the elaboration and performance of predecessors, and it was difficult to see anything new. But where did this feeling of being on the verge of bursting forth come from? At first, it was like a gentle wind blowing, but unknowingly, it seemed to have become a storm that went straight into the heart. With the unique rich range of the cello, the soul hidden in the body seemed to tremble in the sound of the zither. Gradually, the intense melody entered an increasingly tight rhythm, and finally, it turned into a snowstorm, cruelly and fanatically enveloping everything. It was like a thunderstorm, and the earth shook. From the rapid melody of winter, all the joy and joy were suppressed in this indescribable prelude. But with a trace of clear string sound in the storm of suffering, a crack appeared in the seal of the storm. Then, the melody like a wild horse galloped out from the prelude, climbing to the climax of all things, flying with the sound of the string, leaving the depression of the past and the wind and snow behind, running freely. All things were singing. The brisk melody was reborn from the base of suffering, flying into the sky, sprinkling the dew of hope like rain. At that moment, Mr. Zhao couldn't help but take a long breath. It was as if he had seen time go back, returning to the poor and confused years. Those beautiful, painful, seemingly desperate and bumpy futures, and those futures that led to hope, everything. He staggered forward in the cold winter, and the dawn at the end of the sky, chased by countless people. The corners of his mouth curled up in a nostalgic smile. Even his harsh eyes became gentle. He slowly closed his eyes and immersed himself in this rare relaxation and joy. When the sound of the zither gradually dissipated, silence came. The huge auditorium was silent at the moment. In the long silence, it seemed that everyone was recalling the remnants of the zither's sound in their memory. Finally, the silence was finally broken, in the applause of Mr. Zhao's approval. Then, the storm-like applause engulfed everything, and there were fanatical shouts from the audience. On the chair, Huaishe Mk2 stood up, nodded reservedly, and bowed to thank. The corners of his mouth curved into a smile, not losing his elegance. It's touching, like the sound of nature. In the alumni seats, Even the picky audience couldn't help but applaud, nodding and sighing. Watching the child on the stage, it reminds me of my past youth. Come on, you were a coward. How can you compare with him? Someone glanced at that guy and couldn't help but tear him down. But recalling the sound of the zither just now, he still couldn't help but praise. What a genius! People like me, who have no musical cells, almost burst into tears. And the graceful lady just now had tears in her eyes. She picked up the microphone and asked directly, "Outstanding performance, young man, what made you play such miraculous music?" "It's drugs, I drugged it. 20 milligrams of aphrodisiac, 1 milligram of lucid dream, and finally 100 milliliters of alcohol to make a volatile alchemy potion. If you don't have enough skill, you can make up for it with your skills. Not to mention a human, if the concentration was a little higher, even a pig would cry." Of course, he couldn't say that. On the stage, the young man stood up and smiled. "A little talent and perseverance. Thank you, everyone." After that, he took 2 steps back, turned around and walked backstage. So polite. The principal was still immersed in the emotion just now. He didn't forget to look at the old man beside him. "Mr. Zhao, what do you think?" Mr. Zhao pondered for a long time and couldn't help but sigh. "A rising star is really scary. Every time I see such a young man, I feel old. By the way, did you just say that he's going to go in a professional direction?" The principal nodded and his eyes lit up. "Mr. Li, let me have him." The old man looked at the woman on the left who was also interested. "It's a pity to give such a good seedling to Yaoqi Entertainment. Look at what you're saying, pop music is also music. Besides, that child has the potential to be an idol." Although she said that, the two of them were not going to fight over a young man. Ms. Li just smiled and reminded him, "There are not many young people who are willing to suffer and take the path of classical music. If he changes his mind later, you can't blame me. He has talent." Mr. Zhao held the table and slowly got up. He looked at the principal. "Can you accompany me backstage?" "Sure." The principal nodded frantically. 5 minutes later, Huaisher MK2 looked at the old man standing in front of him with a smile. It was as if he didn't react and didn't know what had happened. Seeing that he was dumbfounded, the principal hurriedly added, "Mr. Zhao is an internationally famous performer. The teaching materials you're practicing now are all written by him. Haven't you always wanted to go in a professional direction? Why are you waiting for such a good opportunity?" He frantically blinked at Huaisher, indicating that he should quickly nod. If Huaisher were here, he would definitely be ecstatic. Unfortunately, it wasn't Huaisher who was standing here, but a ruthless humanoid repeater, Huaisher MK2, and its driver. Guaranteed admission to Dongxia Music University? The last disciple of a well-known performer? What the hell? That won't do. Huaisher still wants to be an ascender with me. When she heard that the old man in front of her wanted to carry a small hoe and steal her young shoots, Crow was very unhappy. If she were here, she would definitely roll her eyes and ignore him. However, now that she was wearing Huaisher's face, she had to consider the impact. In the end, she could only smile and thank him before tactfully declining. Although this decision was unexpected, Mr. Zhao didn't continue to pester him, nor did he get angry. He just nodded and left a business card for Huaisher before turning around and leaving. Although pop music is more popular, the art is still in classical music. Before leaving, Mr. Zhao said, "If you change your mind, call me anytime. I'll be in Jinling for the next few months." "Okay." Huaisher MK2 smiled and took the business card, then quietly threw it into the corner. However, when he turned around, he saw that the corridor behind him was filled with young and beautiful female juniors. Countless gazes were fixed on his face with deep affection. Huaisher MK2 was stunned. He couldn't help but slap his head. "Oh, it seems like I used a bit too much. No, I shouldn't use Huaishi's dosage as a baseline, not even 1/10 of it, but what should I do this time? I'll just deal with it for the time being. Anyway, it will return to normal after the effect of the drug wears off. Thinking of this, Huaishi MK2 ran her fingers through her hair and turned around with a smile. Are the girls here for me? Following his movements, the afternoon sun shone on the side of his delicate and handsome face. The corners of his mouth curled up into a devilish smile that seemed to carry an invisible force, making his handsome face even more unruly. Yu Dongri's business smile was even more beautiful than his master's. Amidst the continuous O's, Sophia MK2 opened her arms and was drowned by the girls. Chapter 112. When Huaishi finally returned to the school, he saw MKI gasping for air in the piano room. Her hair was a mess and her clothes were unkempt. She looked like she had been beaten up. When she saw Huaishi return, it was like she had seen her savior. You're finally back. I'll be leaving first. Crow grabbed Huaishi's hand and took over his various outfit. She hung them on her body, and then her face quickly changed into another person's appearance. She jumped over the wall and left. Finally, she seemed to remember something. She turned around and said, "By the way, you don't have to rush back for dinner tonight." Then, she smiled meaningfully. "After all, you'll probably be very busy tonight." Huaishi was dumbfounded. What was going on? Then, he heard the sound of someone knocking on the door. A soft voice answered. "Senior, are you in there?" She said, "I'm here for private tutoring." Huaishi was stunned. What had happened? What exactly happened? Division Director Fu stood next to the vault with his hands on his hip. He witnessed this horrifying scene. He turned to the manager of Wanli beside him. "Now, you're telling me that in Xin High, there are not only people smuggling, but there are also people who betray each other?" The manager smiled awkwardly. "I don't think it's smuggling. It's just that the customs procedures are not complete. I don't care what kind of business you have with the customs. In Xin High, this is called smuggling." Division Director Fu spat on the ground. He took out a book from his pocket and wrote a ticket. 30 times the original fine, within 3 days, or your license will be revoked. Okay. The manager nodded quickly. He knew that he was already being lenient. Division Director Fu was not a bad person. He looked rough, but as long as he didn't cross the line, he was quite easy to talk to. So be it if he had a bad mouth. At least it was better than that inspector with the surname AI coming to confiscate everything and revoke all their licenses. After this matter was resolved, Division Director Fu's expression did not relax. If anything, his expression became darker. He walked into the vault and looked around. Suddenly, he asked, "Do you have any recordings?" "Only bits and pieces." The engineer who was responsible for the surveillance had a bitter expression. It didn't show the faces at all. It was within his expectations. Director Fu nodded and asked again, "What about the Ascendant in charge of security?" "My hand was burned. It's just a minor injury." "Who asked about his injuries? Where's his statement?" Director Fu rolled his eyes and glared at him. "What happened to the one who ran away? Was it a man or a woman? How tall was it? What was his origin? What was his divine mark? What was his path? Have you figured it out?" It's said that he's an alchemist from Rome. Druid lineage, level 2, about 1.9 meters tall, wearing a gas mask and sunglasses, so I can't see his face. There's also no evidence left at the scene. It's done so cleanly. Director Fu was so angry that he laughed. It was too clean. Instead, it was abnormal. He felt that there was something wrong with the way he was being so secretive. He bent down and looked at the broken video clips on the screen. He rushed into the vault alone, took care of the security guards, and then burned the vault to get the items. This stance, why do I feel like it's familiar? I think I've seen him somewhere before. Director Fu pinched his chin as his expression changed. Then, he suddenly turned around and walked out. Wan Li's representative was dumbfounded. Division Chief, where are you going? Second High. Director Fu glanced at him from the corner of his eyes. Today is my daughter's school anniversary performance. She still has a performance. Shouldn't I go over and give her a round of applause? Why, do you have a problem with that? No, no, the representative shook his head in panic. He awkwardly watched Director Fu leave. In fact, as soon as Director Fu left the house, he hung the sign of the Special Affairs Department on his car and drove straight into the parking lot of Second High. After jumping out of the car, he flew past the auditorium of the performance and went straight to the piano room. He was handcuffed and had a gun at his waist. With a cold expression, he pushed aside the teacher who came to inquire about the situation and went up to the third floor. He leaned his ear against the door of Huai Shi's piano room to listen. Behind the door, there were panting sounds that could make one's heart beat faster. There was also a panicked voice. Didn't you say you were only going to play the piano? It's okay to do other things. But I'm still not used to progress so quickly. It's okay, just let me take the lead. You won't be used to it at first, but you'll soon like it. The voice chuckled. Director Fu's expression became uglier and uglier. Good Lord, I'm working so hard on this case, but this little bastard is actually doing it in broad daylight, and in school too. That's too much. Without waiting for the bastard behind the door to come up with something, he kicked the door open and barged in. He shouted, "Huai Shi, you're in trouble. Come with us." In the piano room behind the door, Huai Shi was being pressed against the chair by the enthusiastic junior. His jacket had fallen to the ground. If not for his hands holding it tightly, his t-shirt would have been pulled off. Now, his heart was beating fast as he stopped the junior from pulling his belt. When he saw Director Fu barging in, he heaved a sigh of relief as if he had been saved. Why was it different from what he imagined? Shouldn't a beast like you be the one humiliating the poor girl? Director Fu was stunned for a moment, then immediately walked forward and handcuffed Huai Shi to the chair. Arrest him on the spot. Huai Shi's heart trembled. He didn't know what evidence he had missed, but his expression was as shocked as expected. He looked confused. What did I do? Why do you care so much? Just arrest him. Director Fu waved for the girl to leave quickly, then looked at him from the corner of his eyes. Don't you know what you've done? I swear to God, I was just playing the piano and I was almost raped by the junior. I'm innocent. Huai Shi's eyes widened. Does the Special Affairs Division want to control me even when I'm playing the piano? Let's not talk about other things. What are you doing? Director Fu sneered. You've only been out for a few days and you're already messing around. She's someone else's girlfriend. How can you say that I'm messing around? It would have been better if Director Fu hadn't mentioned it. The moment he did, Huai Shi became angry. He hadn't even settled the score with Director Fu for fooling him into signing so many guarantee agreements. That's enough. Don't talk about these fancy things with me. Although he was slightly doubting his judgment, Director Fu didn't intend to change his mind. He grabbed Huai Shi's handcuff. Come with me to the Special Affairs Division. Help, help. Huai Shi struggled with all his might. This bastard was trying to frame him. When he entered the Special Affairs Division, Director Fu would be able to do whatever he wanted. You can't do this. I've done meritorious deeds for the Special Affairs Division. I've bled for the Astronomy Society. Let me go. I want to see Ai Qing. I want to see Ai Qing. Save yourself the trouble. You can shout in the interrogation room. Director Fu sneered. He pulled the handcuffs and turned around. His expression immediately stiffened. He saw Fu Yi leaning against the door and eating popcorn. When did you get here? When you said you were caught red-handed. Fu Yi looked down regretfully at the DV hanging on her wrist. I wanted to film some dirt, but you ruined it, Dad. You're still a child. Don't get involved in these things. I'll tell you later. Director Fu's expression changed. In the end, he waved his hand and motioned for her to move aside. Fu Yi shook her head and glanced at Huaishur. She said directly, "He was with me during the joint performance. Even if something happened, they wouldn't just arrest him and not me, right?" Silence. Dead silence. Director Fu didn't speak. He silently looked at the woman in front of him and the stunned Huaishur behind him. His gaze wandered between the two of them. After a long time, he finally spoke. However, there was no joy or anger in his voice. Instead, there was a trace of exhaustion. "Are you sure? The reporters haven't left yet. You can watch the video." Fu Yi replied bluntly. Her tone wasn't as sweet as it used to be when she was filial to her father. Perhaps that harmonious atmosphere was deliberately created by the two of them from the beginning. They weren't intimate and just kept a distance. In the short time they spent together, they played the roles of a good father and a good daughter to each other. That was all. She looked at her father and told him, "Huaishur is sitting next to me." Director Fu's expression changed. He opened his mouth several times and wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. After a long silence, he lowered his head and unlocked Huaishur's handcuffs. He turned and left. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. In the quiet piano room, neither of them spoke. At the door, the stunned teacher looked at this scene. He opened his mouth to say something, but Fu Yi looked over and glanced at him with a strange gaze. "I'm sorry, teacher. I still have something to say to Huaishur," she asked. "If you have any questions, can we talk about it next time?" Perhaps it wasn't until this moment that she really looked like Director Fu's daughter. When she was unhappy, her eyes were equally fierce. The teacher left embarrassedly. Fu Yi walked into the room and closed the door. She tilted her head and looked at Huaishur. "Is there anything you want to say?" "I'm sorry." Huaishur sighed and lowered his head apologetically. "I'm really sorry. That wasn't you just now, right?" Fu Yi lowered her head and lit a cigarette. "I was wondering when you started catwalking. Was it a trick of the Ascended?" "Something like that." Huaishur sighed. "I just have one question." Fu Yi scratched her head and sighed irritably. "You didn't do anything serious, right? If it's really something serious, I might even have to sacrifice my family for justice." "I'm sorry. In fact, Director Fu doesn't have any evidence. You don't have to worry. Nothing will happen," Huaishur said apologetically. "Anyway, thank you for helping me. Don't flatter yourself. I'm just venting my anger." Fu Yi laughed softly, as if she was mocking herself. "He promised me that he would come to watch me dance. He even said that no matter what happened, he would come. In the end, I prepared for so long for this day. I even specially ordered dinner and rehearsed for a long time." She whispered, "He didn't come." She didn't come either. She had clearly promised. In the end, no one came. Huaishur heard a faint cry. He closed his eyes. Chapter 113. Huaishur returned home earlier than most people expected. It was also later than some people expected. Fang Shu, who was waiting at the door, bowed and reported, "Miss Ai came to visit this evening. She left after learning that young master wasn't here. She just told you to go to the astronomy meeting when you're free." Huaishur paused and couldn't help but scratch his head. She must have caught wind of something. It was a perfect plan, but it was full of holes. Shouldn't he be hiding his achievements and fame? It's true that he's hiding his achievements and fame. In the basement, Crow shrugged. "You see, Director Fu just wants to mess with you, and Ai Qing may only suspect you for the time being. So, don't worry, we did it cleanly. There's no evidence. If anyone talks nonsense, we can slander them. Where did you learn such a TVB way of committing crimes?" Huaishur rolled his eyes and sat on the chair like a salted fish again. He didn't even want to move. In fact, Fu Yi just cried for a while and wiped her tears away. She didn't lend him a shoulder to lean on, nor did she look weak and helpless. After rubbing her eyes, she raised her head, finished her cigarette, and left. But Huai Shi still didn't feel good. You have to think positively. You're not the only one who lied to her, right? Huai Shi couldn't help but want to roll his eyes again. You can't think that trust is cheap just because there are so many liars, right? Besides, if you didn't do anything, Director Fu might have gone, and her mother still wouldn't have come. Crow looked at him with pity. This isn't something that can be changed with a dinner and a meeting. Many things can never be changed once they happen. So, put away your sense of responsibility, kid. It's not time for you to be responsible for others. Or do you really want to marry her for the rest of your life? Huai Shi was stunned for a long time. Then, he scratched his head and said, "We're too familiar with each other. I don't want to make a move." "That's more like it. As my best friend and brother, you should just do your duty as a negative energy receiver. It's not like I'm asking you to be a goblin or a bootlicker. There's no need for such a sad drama." Crow looked behind him. "Compared to this, shouldn't we inspect the goods?" She looked at the small box on the table and rubbed her wings excitedly. "Let's hope it's worth it." Huai Shi sighed, opened the box, and carefully took out the yellowed fragment. It didn't look like paper, but more like some other material. After such a long time, it still hadn't been catalyzed, which was surprising. Could it be some kind of magical beast skin? Don't think too much. It's just plastic. Crow looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. Plastic? Huai Shi was stunned and could not believe it. Plastic already existed at that time? Although it was plastic, Huai Shi took a closer look and found that it really was plastic, a piece of plastic paper? Crow shrugged. Alchemists are always up to something. Count Street Germain said that this was the essence that he sifted out of oil. It can be used for convenient writing and storage, and it's more reliable than paper. Then how on earth does this thing work? Huai Shi was amused. Is it some kind of peerless secret manual that needs to be practiced? Or do we have to find the materials to make the things on it? It's not that troublesome. It should be said that it's a piece of cake. Crow flapped her wings and the heavy book of destiny appeared out of thin air. It fell on the table and opened on its own. The pages moved without any wind and directly flipped to the middle. Then, a few pieces of torn paper appeared. It was like the traces left behind after being torn off. Huai Shi tried to compare the two and found that they fit perfectly. It was as easy as plugging in a USB drive to a computer. He let go of his hand, and the formula automatically fell from his hand and was sucked into the Book of Destiny. The two pieces of paper merged together as if they were one. Immediately afterwards, the cracks began to close up. Huai Shi's vision went dark. He instantly fell to the ground, his entire body powerless. He only had time to curse. This thing was absorbing his origin substance. In the blink of an eye, almost all of his origin substance had been sucked dry. Immediately afterwards, Crow, who had been prepared for this, opened the copper box that he had hidden somewhere. The origin substance that had been stored inside quickly poured into the pages of the Book of Destiny. It could be said that there was an ocean of it. The origin substance of more than 1,000 people had been used up in an instant. Huai Shi was even more curious about where Crow had gotten so much origin substance. Look, wasn't it the purified citizens who were causing trouble a few days ago? Crow laughed embarrassedly. You were busy, and I didn't want to disturb you, so I sneaked in a little. So you were the one who secretly stole their spoils of war, right? Crow shook his head and said seriously, I just picked up a few things that I didn't want. How could you call that stealing? Huai Shi was just about to say something when his vision suddenly went dark again. This time it really was dark. He couldn't see anything. He had lost his heartbeat and his pulse had stopped. He couldn't feel his breathing, and he couldn't feel his limbs or anything else. It was as if he had been tossed into the deepest darkness. Eternal oblivion. Immediately afterwards, however, a spark shot out from the depths of the darkness. It stopped in midair and slowly grew in size. It turned into a speck of flame. The flame burned brightly, illuminating all of the darkness. Huai Shi was completely ignited. He had turned into fire. It burned vigorously. The speck of flame grew in size countless times in the blink of an eye, then quickly collapsed and shrank. In the end, it was hard to tell whether or not it was actually fire. It was just a speck of light, but it seemed to contain an entire world. Countless changes emerged from it, constantly colliding with each other, bursting out bursts of light. It was as precise as a clock. Countless gear-like flames formed a mechanical phenomenon that was strict to every change. Tens of thousands of strands gathered in one place, finally forming a pure white flame that was so delicate and complicated that it was difficult to see through it with the naked eye. It rose, extinguished, reborn, and even exhausted all of its changes. It was as if they were drilling into wood, or as if they were being extracted by lightning from the sky, or as if they were rising after being ignited by a high temperature, or as if they came from a slight collision, or as if they were stimulated by chemical substances, or as if they were bursting out of the collapse of a star, or as if they were being ejected from the mouth of a dragon. Huai Shi seemed to have been born countless times in an instant. After exhausting the origin of all flames in the world, he became a part of the fire. He was a mass of plasma, he was an energy gradient field, he was an energy wave that radiated in all directions, he became a phenomenon after ionization. He seemed to be material but also without a body. He seemed to be a legend, but he spread in the mortal world, bringing light and heat. In the end, Huai Shi finally understood how he should be named. This was a miracle. It was the embers left behind when miracles changed and were born. In that instant, he woke up from the fire and opened his eyes. He no longer needed to use the dust of the liberated. In an instant, he entered the form of a ghost and felt the flames of calamity spewing out from the endless darkness. But the flames that were usually untamed and difficult to tame now seemed to be a part of him, flowing tame and quietly in the crack in his chest, glowing with a magma-like light. When he put away the flames, he finally completely transformed into the darkness. Under the table where the light couldn't reach, he found that the outline of his legs began to gradually thin, like ink that was about to melt in water, gradually blurring. The darkness became his coat, concealing his body. Good progress. Crow nodded approvingly. When you can stand in the darkness and disappear, the ghost's divine mark will completely become a part of your soul. Standing in the darkness, no one can see? What's the use of that? Huai Shi couldn't help but laugh. As long as it's a little darker, no one can see it, right? Then what about infrared night vision? Origin substance perception? There were also countless probing methods available to them. The naked eye is just one of the most common and most easily deceived methods of observation. Crow's gaze became as if he was looking at an idiot. Don't be so greedy, bastard. This innate skill is called Dark Cloak. As you advance to the third step, you will become a Hellwalker. Once you reach the fifth step, you will become a serene sanctuary. As long as you want, the darkness will stand around you like a fortress, blocking all attacks for you. Huai Shi was fascinated when he heard this, but this time he was more cautious. He asked, "Then when can I reach the fifth step?" "That's hard to say." Crow laughed awkwardly and looked away, changing the topic. "The record fragment can't only bring you so little growth, right? There is more. Give me a dust of the liberated." Huai Shi took the white crystal and threw it into the hole in his chest. The darkness that he was immersed in began to stir, as if an engine was roaring to life. This time, however, not a single trace of flames leaked out from the sacred mark. Huai Shi no longer tried to block it from the outside. He tried to suppress the scale of the reaction between the two, in other words, the speed at which the dust of the liberated burned. The originally uncontrollable reaction was now very easy to control. He easily divided the dust of the liberated into 16 layers, one layer at a time. The power was limited to a range that he could control, and the burning process was extended to its limit. He estimated that the time limit was about half an hour. Unless he encountered a large-scale battle, half an hour was more than enough for normal conflicts and encounters. The current him could even control the dust of the liberated to unleash half an hour's worth of firepower all at once. More importantly, Huaishe felt that the flames burning in his chest had undergone some kind of qualitative change, becoming something that he could not describe. When he raised his hand, a pure white flame ignited in his hand. From within the flame, countless pieces of iron that looked like dust slowly appeared, connecting with each other. Chapter 114. Sealing Hand. Huaishe was currently continuously converting his origin substance into iron. As the flames surged, the countless grains of iron began to rapidly change. In the end, they became as black as crystal, and after a large amount of ash was mixed in, they took on the appearance of shadow iron. Amidst the flames, a crooked short sword slowly appeared. Finally, Huaishe's origin substance was completely used up. The flames dissipated, and the short sword fell into his hands. Huaishe couldn't help but grow excited as he examined the short sword. Now, he no longer needed a long period of nurturing and deliberately stripping away his emotions to create a weapon. However, compared to the axe of wrath, the sacrificial knife, and the rope of sorrow, this dagger was surprisingly weak. In addition, because he lacked experience, the internal structure wasn't tightly knit. After 2 strikes with the hammer, the short sword shattered into pieces. After exhausting all of his origin substance, he had only managed to create something this small. However, the benefit was that the steel that he had created seemed to be able to exist forever. It had already completely transformed from origin substance into a physical object, unlike the blade and axe, which would return to Huaishe's body as soon as he withdrew his power. It was just a short sword, and it had taken so long. No matter how he looked at it, it didn't seem to be very useful. That's not necessarily true, Huaishe. Crow's expression became strange. As she looked at him, Su Chen felt a sense of unease. She spoke in a tone that didn't allow Huaishe to refuse. Starting tomorrow, you will need to spend 3 hours a day studying alchemy. Starting from the most basic synthesis formulas, you will need to learn how to differentiate between 600 metals and 40,000 alloys, as well as their materials and properties. Then, you will need to memorize tens of thousands of derivations and laws. What are you planning? Huaishe was stunned. You can only create a short sword. That won't be very useful, right? Are you planning on doing wholesale? Crow laughed. There are countless things in this world that are more useful than a sword. Why are you so obsessed with selling swords, Huaishe? She glanced at the title page of the Book of Fate. On Huaishe's form, following the fusion of the recipes, a new skill silently appeared. Unlike the other skills, which were gray in color, and unlike the pitch black of death premonition, the words of this skill were golden in color, and there was an additional line of unclear words below. When he comes, who will be able to bear it? When he appeared, who could stand still? For he is like the fire of an alchemist, and the alkali of a draper. This was probably the most important part of the record, right? Count Saint-Germain had pursued the miracle of change all his life, and had thus far longed for it. Alchemy Fire LV1. Let's start from today. Crow happily said, Don't worry, this is just the basics. It's easy to learn. Just as Huaishe was trying to sneak away, a rope flew out of nowhere and tied him up. The crow landed on his nose, lowered its head and said in a meaningful tone, I promise it will be a very happy time. Half a month later, on the mountainside of Qingxiu Mountain, next to the Stone Marrow Museum. Yes, police comrade, it's him. An indignant villager pointed at Huai Shi's face. Every night in the middle of the night, there's a rumble here. Maybe some criminals colluded with grave robbers to blow up the mountain and dig up the tombs. I didn't. Huai Shi, who was in front of the shed, argued with difficulty. I'm studying. Studying? Coming here to study? Young man, you look so gentle. I didn't expect you to lie so easily. Sir, it really wasn't me. Huai Shi stood in front of the shed and tried to explain. Do I look like I can carry explosives? I'm innocent. The angry villagers surrounded him. Then what the hell are you learning here on the mountainside every day? How can you almost collapse the slope in front of you? It's quiet here. It's convenient for me to practice my violin and study. Huai Shi took out his cello for the umpteenth time. In order to show that he was telling the truth, he even played 2 pieces on the spot. The melodious melody seemed to calm the villagers on the other side of the mountain a little. But the police who had been alerted politely asked to search his shed to see what was in it. Huai Shi opened the broken door of the shed, revealing a table, a chair, and a pile of thick foreign language materials. He really looked like a poor child who came to the mountainside every day to study hard in search of peace. Although it didn't sound very reliable to build a shed in the mountains to study. That's to seek inspiration. I've been composing for the past 2 days, and every day at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I go down the mountain. There's no one here at all. Huai Shi talked nonsense seriously. As for the rumbling explosion, I didn't hear it at all. It's not someone else, right? As soon as he finished speaking, a loud roar came from the other side of the mountain ridge. Thick smoke rose. The villagers looked at each other. Huai Shi spread his hands. See, I told you it wasn't me. After persuading the villagers and the police to leave and promising that he would soon tear down the shed and leave, Huai Shi sat on the chair and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then he glared at Crow, who was slowly flying over from the explosion. Look at what you've done. You can't blame me. Crow spread his hands innocently. It's not me who caused the explosion in the middle of the night. I even helped you create a fake scene and false evidence. How can you be so heartless? How would I know that alchemy is so easy to explode? Huai Shi was innocent and angry. He took off his gloves, revealing his 10 fingers covered in scars and band-aids. If it weren't for Crow's medicine, his hands might have been blown off long ago. As for why he came here, it was a sad story. In the beginning, Huai Shi practiced in the basement, and then on the first day, he blew up the laboratory that he spent 8 million to get. Then on the second day, he blew it up again. After Feng Shu tactfully suggested for the 3rd time that he was too old to be disturbed, he had to build a shed on the mountainside to conduct his own experiments. As for the police who came to investigate today, he wasn't worried. It wasn't the first time anyway. The mountain wasn't a place with good feng shui, and there were no ancient tombs, let alone mineral veins. Even if the police came to investigate several times, they wouldn't find anything. He just had to be more careful when conducting experiments in the future. In fact, the problem didn't lie with Huai Shi's technique. Although Huai Shi's technique wasn't perfect, it wasn't to the extent that he would blow up everything he touched. But the key was that other than the initial trial and practice, Crow didn't allow him to use any alchemy equipment. Including the balance, high-end electronic scale, clean room, and other equipment, all the alchemy reactions had to be done by hand. As for the raw materials, it was even simpler. After directly familiarizing himself with the properties of the materials, he used the imprisoning hand to make them. Whether it was gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, or other things on the table of elements, or even things that weren't on the table of elements, they all had to be made by hand. That was the problem. Most of the alchemy reactions, even the slightest mistake in the creation of metals, would cause a violent explosion. If it weren't for the alchemy fire, which could control the direction of the blast wave, he would probably have blown off his hands and be lying on the bed in a perfect vegetative state. And the final result was that until now, when he made the basic, static metal storage liquid for apprentices, he was still stuttering, and the number of times he succeeded was very few. Instead, he accidentally found several kinds of metal materials that were prone to exploding. "How can you make everything by hand?" Huaishur complained. "You're making things difficult for me." "Everything is difficult at the beginning. You have to get used to it." Crow was very calm about this. The basics of alchemy include botany, essence, application, and a lot of other things. Ordinary people will need more than 5 years to get started. What I'm letting you learn is already the most emasculated version. Abandon all the formulas that require other materials and only focus on metals. This is already the easiest of the easiest. So, it's not too much to ask of you, right? Crow was right. Now, in the Book of Destiny, Huaishur had a new skill in his skill bar. Alchemy, Metal Study, LVL1. The most basic of the basic. It was the kind of rookie who understood the principles but would stumble when executing. What's the use of only learning metals? Huaishur sighed. Do you want me to go to college and study metallurgy? Walk the path of a scholar? That's not impossible, but you don't have the talent of a creator. It's best not to spend too much time on this kind of thing. It's a stage for talent. Ordinary people who spend decades on it will only end up with nothing. Crow seemed to have misunderstood, but he didn't agree with Huaishur's idea. There are only 2 reasons why I want you to study metals. One of them is this. Saying this, her wings slowly unfolded, revealing a slender tube of potion. Sealed in a transparent glass-like container was a silver liquid. The metal was in a liquid state, swaying slightly like mercury. Silver blood potion. It was also the blood potion that many sublimators would choose in a hasty battle. If they didn't have time to drink it, they could even pour it directly on the wound. The metal in it would perfectly merge with the flesh and heal the wound. It was unknown whether it was glue or artificial flesh. Although it was a poison that ordinary people couldn't metabolize, it was a good medicine for sublimators to repair their stigmata. Almost every sublimator would carry a large amount of these supplies when exploring the abyss. Ever since the silver blood potion was discovered, countless recipes have been derived, such as the higher-level golden soul and amber origin substance. But the most special thing about the silver blood potion is that its recipe is completely made of metal. That's right, it's all within the range of your hands. Crow said indifferently. In other words, as long as you work hard enough, there will be a day when you can even make a blood potion with your hands. She paused for a moment, then said meaningfully, "By the way, even the basic version of the silver blood potion costs 300,000 per vial." In that instant, Huaishur's eyes lit up. He saw a bright and resplendent future. Chapter 115. Although the future was bright, this time Huaishur was at least careful. After the excitement, he asked, "Then when can I make the silver blood potion?" According to the usual method, an apprentice will join for 3 years and help the teacher deal with the leftovers. After 2 years, if you perform well, you will be given the opportunity to work independently. After about a year, you will be able to make the silver blood potion. But if you omit the irrelevant subjects and a lot of time-wasting things, you will need about 2 years. But with the help of the alchemy fire, it may only take a year. So slow. Huaishur instantly lost the hope of getting rich overnight. You can just kill 2 alchemists who specialize in metallurgy. Crow stared at this disappointing guy. There are a lot of people like this in the Astronomy Society's bounty. Find a weak chicken, wipe his neck, and directly flip the record. How fast is that? Forget it. What's the matter with killing people to advance? If it were the Red Gloves, Hiluo, and the others who had died, Huaishur would be happy to see it happen. But if he had to kill to obtain this power, what difference was there between him and those perverts who killed people for fun? But then again, I feel that the red gloves are cheap, only 10 million. Huaisher looked at the money in his account that had decreased by more than half and couldn't help but sigh. An international wanted criminal can only buy 40 red bottles. The price for a dead person is 10 million, which is the reward given by the Astronomy Society. After all, the main bounty is given by the Russian Federation's double-headed vulture group. Speaking of this, Crow's eyes became strange. Generally speaking, the bounty for a middle-level Green Sun member like the Red Gloves is about 80 million dongxia dollars. Seeing that he was born in Rome and knows a lot of secrets, we added another 30 million for a total of about 110 million dongxia dollars. Huaisher was stunned. According to the current market price, a bottle of drink was 1 yuan, a bowl of beef noodles was 4 yuan, a book was 7 yuan, and a mobile game lottery was 162 yuan. 110 million was enough for Huaisher to open a beverage factory and sell who knew how many bowls of noodles at the same time and open 10 chain bookstores. If he used all of it to draw cards, it was enough for him to become a small shareholder of Xinhua Games. Why did I get so little? Huaisher jumped up in grief and anger. Is the Astronomy Society taking my money? On the contrary, the Astronomy Society gave you a consolation prize out of their own pocket. The Crow whistled. They won a live red glove, you know? A live red glove, you know? Only a living red glove could obtain the sublimation route of Taksin. Only a living red glove could give out information and information. Only a living red glove could be useful to the Russian Federation and exchange captives. In other words, you are definitely the best bargainer in Xin Hai. You burned down 100 million RMB and only left behind a dead body. What do you think the Russian Federation needs a dead body for? To whip it? Huaisher looked at her blankly. After a long time, his whole body turned gray. How did it feel to brush past 100 million? What kind of pain? He was holding the rope of sorrow that was wrapped around the beam of the room. He felt like he had lost all hope. He wanted to cry, but there were no tears. What was so good about being alive? He might as well go to the two-dimensional world. Also, do you have some kind of misunderstanding about the silver blood serum? Crow continued to attack. You don't think it is a common medicine that can be bought with money, do you? Huaisher was shocked. It is so expensive, but it can't be bought? It is not the serum that is expensive, young man. Crow shook her head and sighed. Based on what I know, a few days ago, there was a pharmaceutical company from the American Freedom Alliance that raised the price of their special medicine by 55 times. What makes you think that there is such a thing as good quality and cheap in the world of the sublimators? Every silver blood serum is a surgical operation that can be performed at any time. It is a chance to save lives. How can it be cheap? But doesn't it only take 5 or 6 years for someone to learn how to make this thing? Yes, it takes 5 or 6 years. A talented person may only need 3 years. But will you take a medicine that has no certificate or certification, a mysterious origin, and no one will endorse it? Crow said, all the silver blood serum that can be circulated on the market must be certified by the Stone Cauldron Society. Otherwise, it will be regarded as a third-rate product. Not only will it not be allowed to be sold, but if it is found to be traded in private, it will attract the arrest of the Astronomers Association and a bounty from the Stone Cauldron Society. If you want to be certified, you have to pass the assessment of the Stone Cauldron Society and get a standard Level 1 registration alchemist certificate. You also have to register an alchemy workshop in the Stone Cauldron Society to be qualified to sell the silver blood serum. Do you think that is the end? She continued. In addition to the most common pure silver and jade tin, the Stone Cauldron Society has monopolized the development rights of all the minerals needed to produce the formula at the border and hell. They are only provided to their own registered members. Other than that, other than large organizations that have a large quota, there is a limit to the amount that each person can buy every year. If you want to buy more, you can only sell it privately to someone who has a quota. The price will be even higher. But no matter how expensive it is or how high the production is, the demand will always exceed the supply. No one will refuse to store something that can save their life at any time. Huaishe fell into a daze. For the first time in his life, he understood the power of a monopoly, as well as the terrifying power of trusts, syndicates, and cartels. But, does the Astronomers Association not care? Guess who the second largest shareholder of the Stone Cauldron Society is? Crow laughed strangely. Now you know the benefits of the Astronomers Association? As long as you become a registered official member, everything you buy on the internal website will be at cost price. And you can even use the current world's currency to pay for it. You don't need to use origin-form crystals. Hurry up and latch onto Miss AI Ching's golden thigh. Once you go to Jinling and register as an official member, our funds will be put to good use. Huaishe was instantly on guard. Someone wants to spend my money. Don't be so cautious, little brother. Crow's tone became gentle. You have to think on the bright side. At least this time, the money is being spent on your account. You know exactly where the money is being spent, right? Huaishe actually felt that what she said made a bit of sense, but he immediately reacted. But you are also spending my money. Who are we? Why are we still talking about you and me? How distant? Crow raised her wings and wrapped them around his head. My money is your money. Isn't your money my money? Then you have to have money. In any case, no matter what the crow said, it didn't seem like a good thing. However, Huaishe at least paid attention and didn't get distracted. He continued to focus on the original topic. Didn't you say you had 2 goals? What about the other one? Let's talk about it after you finish this. Crow rolled her eyes and pointed at the documents on the table. DeLang, it's time to brew the medicine. The police just left. Why are you in such a rush to commit a crime? Don't worry, I already have a solution for your problem. Crow rubbed her chin with her wings and analyzed as if she had just thought it over. The reason you exploded was because there was a mistake in the metal composition. The reason there was a problem with the metal composition was because you had trouble maintaining a stable and continuous supply of origin substance. And the reason for the mistake was largely because you weren't focused enough. Simply put, you were distracted. Isn't that obvious? Those special metal compositions were each more complicated than the last. Even though Huaishe didn't need to start accumulating them at the molecular level, it was still quite tiring to convert the origin substance into the same type. It was equivalent to refining a dozen or so alloys all at once. And you couldn't just focus on the details. You had to look at the big picture. A single mistake could cause all of your previous efforts to go to waste. If it was light, it would be scrap. If it was heavy, it would explode. Who would be able to withstand that? So, I have an idea. If we first get rid of the requirement of using it as you please and slow down the pace a bit so you can familiarize yourself with the process, then there will be a way to ensure that your thoughts are accurate and that your supply of origin substance is balanced. Crow kept Su Chun in suspense for a while before snapping her fingers. Let's try meditating. How about it? Since you've already started to play the zither, you naturally don't mind spending a little more effort, right? What you said seems to make some sense. Huaishe rubbed his chin and thought for a while. He felt like he was on the right track. He picked up the cello and lowered his eyes. The sound of the violin began to play. Within the Special Affairs Division's quiet interrogation room, AI Ching expressionlessly tapped on the table. Her expression was calm. What else? She asked. What else? The manager from Renaissance still refused to give in. We were just tricked into buying a batch of goods that weren't declared to the customs. We already paid the fine. Why are we still being treated like this? Your fine was paid to the Special Affairs Division. What does it have to do with the Astronomy Society? AI Ching glanced at him coldly. The pen in her hand tapped on the record page in front of her. Right now, we're investigating the Renaissance Group's illegal sales of smuggled goods. At this moment, the legal representative from the headquarters next to the manager suddenly corrected her. Inspector AI, this was just a local partner acting on their own initiative. It has nothing to do with the Renaissance Group. The headquarters had no idea about this. Then isn't it even more important to investigate this thoroughly? AI Ching was already well aware of the tricks of these people. Not only was she unperturbed, she even wanted to sneer. Then, who was the one who went through the procedures and didn't complete the customs declaration? Who was the one who assisted you? Who was the one who deceived you? Also, who was involved? And where did the large batch of goods that weren't declared to the customs go? Which store was responsible for selling the goods? Who was the buyer? Don't tell me you don't know this? We already told you this. Due to the personnel management of the local branch, we have already submitted all the information. Also, we're also victims. The legal representative glared at AI Ching and said angrily, "Is the Astronomy Society only going to catch us and let the attacker go unpunished? If that's the case, we will report to the Jinling branch and request." "You don't have to worry about this," AI Ching interrupted him. "I've already sent the most capable member of the XIN High Branch, Huai Shi, to conduct the investigation. Please wait patiently." She paused for a second and showed a sincere smile. "I'm sure you'll hear back soon." Chapter 116. Hearing AI Ching's response, the legal officer laughed. "I haven't heard that the Astronomy Association has any capable members in XIN High." The middle-aged man sneered. "Don't just send some random Tom, Dick, and Harry to deal with this. What we want is result." "Tom, Dick, and Harry?" AI Ching raised her eyebrows. "If you think that the Ascendant who personally killed the international criminal of Green Sun and quelled the uprising of the returning citizens of XIN High is a nobody, then I can only say that Wanli is really full of talents, and there are as many Fifth-Order Ascendants as there are clouds." The legal officer was stunned. He didn't expect AI Ching to have such a solid resume. Then he looked at the manager with suspicion. "Is this woman trying to trick me?" The manager seemed to remember something. He couldn't help but wipe the sweat on his forehead. He shook his head at the legal officer, signaling him not to dwell on this issue. "It seems like you have doubts about his ability? That's normal. After all, he is just a 17-year-old kid." AI Ching's words seemed to be deliberately exposing his shortcomings. It made the hesitant legal officer's expression harden. But then, her voice was heard. "But I have to say, although that guy has a good temper, his style is not gentle." As she said that, AI Ching reached out and took out a thick stack of reports from the wheelchair. She placed it in front of the legal officer. It was a death report that was 2 fingers thick. Or rather, the record was not an exaggeration. Even the elite seeds of the various families who invested a lot of resources could not achieve such a terrifying record. It could be said to be a blood debt, especially the 3 books at the top. Other than the Red Gloves of Green Sun, the other 3 were the former big clients of Wanli, Chi-Wen and his son. This family almost died in the hands of that guy, and it was only a week later. At that time, that guy was still in prison being interrogated. Until now, the viaduct mentioned in the damage report had not been repaired yet. AI Ching asked considerately, "If you really have any opinions about his investigation, why don't you say a few words to him in person? I will call him over now." "No need, no need." The legal commissioner tried his best to avert his gaze from the tragic crime scene photos and forced a smile. "Then it seems that we have at least reached an agreement on this matter." AI Ching nodded in satisfaction. "Just now, you said you wanted results. What a coincidence, I want them too." As she spoke, she tapped her pen on the record in front of her and revealed a kind, formulaic smile. But before that, we have to figure out everything that should be figured out, right? Thus, the investigation continued. In the evening, Huaishur received a call from Ai Qing. By the time he arrived, Ai Qing seemed to have been waiting for a long time. She was sitting in the living room drinking black tea, looking calm and composed. After Huaishur entered, she glanced at him and gestured for Huaishur to sit down. Then, she lowered her head and drank her tea. The first thing she said after putting down the teacup made Huaishur jump up in fright. "Looks like you've gained a lot?" "What did you say?" Huaishur's face twitched. "I didn't hear you clearly." "Ah, then I probably made a mistake." Ai Qing pointed at the document on the table and pushed it over. Huaishur picked it up and glanced at it. He was confused. Operation Authorization? What operation? A few days ago, there was a vicious robbery in Xin High. An alchemist suspected to be from Rome robbed the vault of the Renaissance Group and took away tens of millions worth of goods. How could there be so much? Huaishur almost blurted out. He used all his strength to hold it back and forced a smile. "Is it that bad?" "Yes, so our Astronomy Association must investigate thoroughly." Ai Qing glanced at him and said, "I will leave this matter to you." Huaishur hesitated. "What if we can't catch him?" "Ahem, what I mean is, if I'm a suspect, I will definitely run away after doing the job. I can't just go around looking for him, right? If you can't handle it, then you can report it to the headquarters and then give out a reward. That's it. There are countless cases like this every year. If it's not a big case, there won't even be enough manpower." Ai Qing said calmly. "It's just a label of incompetence on your back and a stain on your resume. Just leave it to me." Huaishur quickly put away the authorization and said in an impassioned voice, "Fighting criminals is the duty of every member of the Astronomy Association." Stain? He didn't care about that. With his resume, it was already a stain. After killing Qi one last time, he was even given a demerit. Furthermore, he wasn't even an official registered employee now, and he didn't want to be promoted. He was satisfied with just this layer of skin. "It's good to be confident." Ai Qing calmly picked up the teacup and looked at him. "However, from the point of mutual trust, both you and I have a long way to go to learn." Huaishur pretended not to hear. "Let's start with helping each other. How about it?" Ai Qing suddenly said. "Huh! Do you have plans tonight?" Ai Qing asked. "For example, with some enthusiastic junior or with Director Fu's daughter? Or with some lady you suddenly confess to? I don't want to disturb your two-person world." "No. There's no such thing." Huaishur shook his head like a rattledrum. He hated that he was clearly innocent, but why did he seem like a pervert in the eyes of others? Once again, he felt the pain of having his reputation ruined. "That's good." Ai Qing nodded. "Go to the Special Affairs Department to report later. You're going on a business trip." "Huh." Huaishur was stunned at first, and then he was shocked. "Business trip? Where are you going?" "Not far, about 5 hours by sea." Ai Qing calmly finished her tea and put down the teacup. "Thanks to a certain suspect who did an unnecessary double-cross, at least I caught the Renaissance Group's weakness. In order to be able to smoothly develop their business in Dongxia, and also to give an explanation to the Astronomy Club, the group of misers held back their tears and handed over a piece of information. As far as they know, a smuggling fleet received a big order. A ship is carrying a border relic excavated from hell from Indonesia to the Russian Federation. Our goal is to join forces with the other inspectors and action commissioners of the Astronomical Association to stop this ship and bring that thing back." "Border relic?" Huaishur was curious. "What border relic? Do we need to mobilize other inspectors?" "A fragment," Ai Qing said, "a fragment of the Philosopher's Stone." "What the hell?" Huaishur's eyes widened, and he almost jumped out of his chair in disbelief. When Huaishur had just become a sublimator, He once had a discussion with Crow about the Philosopher's Stone. After all, this thing was so famous that it really aroused people's curiosity. Moreover, Crow was also very good at alchemy. If she could make it, wouldn't it be a big deal? In this regard, Crow was very calm. Although the Philosopher's Stone is not common, it's not rare to the point where it's hard to find in 1,000 years. Crow replied, "There are probably hundreds of people active in the world today." Active? In the world? Hundreds? People? There are also people who are dead, but I know where your problem is. Yes, the Philosopher's Stone is a living person. In other words, only those who have reached the peak of their own stigmata system and turned into their original form can be called a perfect object, the Philosopher's Stone. This was the division of the stages of a sublimator, the process of gradually transforming into a miracle. Crow also explained to Huai Shi the 5 stages of a sublimator. In alchemy, it was called the path of the fire sword. The first stage, Mercury, was needless to say. It was named after the first metal in alchemy to describe its position as the foundation of sublimator. Using salt, sulfur, and mercury to complete the origin substance fertile soil, it was able to bear miracles. The second stage, gold, was the most important step in one's own lineage, which would determine one's future direction. Sublimators would skillfully grasp the talents and abilities of their respective lineages, and some prominent stigmata would even possess all kinds of strange talents and abilities. For example, the gargoyle's eye of hatred, the third stage, ether, was a change in bloodline. If before it was just a scaled-down, piecemeal strengthening, then now it was a complete strengthening from the inside out. A sublimator would completely surpass the limits of human beings and be endowed with their own sublimator's blood essence. Their vitality would be unbelievably strong. It was like changing one's muscles and marrow. Take He Luo's Naga and the Salvation Society's Chi, for example. Even if they were shot in half, they would still be able to retain their basic consciousness even if they were shot in half by a sniper rifle. And at this stage, under a large amount of vitality, the sublimator's soul would also begin to breed new changes. When the body and soul reached the limit at the same time, both would advance and step into the fourth stage, producing a qualitative change that could turn the world upside down. The fourth stage, star antimony, was completely different from the previous stages. Not only the soul that had completed the transformation, but also the body that could be called a human Godzilla. At this moment, a sublimator could be called a dragon, an angel, a banished immortal, a devil, a son of God, and other legendary creatures that walked in the human world. And in their eyes, the world had become a different appearance. It was the extraordinary vision and soul vision that were rumored to be able to pry open the foundation of physics. For ordinary people, it was impossible to imagine, but in their eyes, it was possible to achieve it with a casual move. This was what ordinary people could imagine as an expert, an expert, an expert. Beyond that, it was not a category that ordinary sublimators could reach. The fifth stage, Philosopher's Stone. Whether it was the White Emperor's son or the blackbird that Huai Shi had seen with his own eyes, they had already made Huai Shi understand what kind of power a sublimator, who had reached the peak of the stigmata lineage could advance, had. Even the congenitally deficient Garuda could purify a weak chicken like Huai Shi like a speck of dust just by relying on its own light. Even Dagon, who was brutally beaten by Fu Sanguang, could transform into a moving border, carrying a large number of sublimators, and invade the present at any time, anywhere, and destroy an entire city with its own weight alone. The importance and preciousness of a level 5 sublimator was far more than that. Chapter 117. As the pinnacle of the path of ascension, those who reached this stage were all heroes born from luck, ability, and resources. They were the embodiment of miracles in the human world. No, they themselves had become miracles and landmarks, illuminating the path of ascension for those who came after them. They were like lighthouses. Regardless of their other powers, as long as they were alive, they would be the original and indispensable existence of the genealogy. Even if they were dead, they would be recognized as sacred remains and treated as precious samples and remains of miracles to be preserved. They would even become the key element for the members of the genealogy to advance, just like the genealogy in America. For some of them, if they wanted to enter the fourth stage of the path of ascension, they had to drink a drop of the first ancestor's blood. Some of them would even become extremely powerful relics at the border. One drop of blood could poison hundreds of thousands of people to death. To put it simply, when they were alive, they would be powerful weapons of mass destruction or precious relics at the border. And no matter if they were alive or dead, destroying Shinhai would be child's play. Now that he heard that he was going to collect the shards of the Philosopher's Stone, Huaishur felt like he was going to be a suicide squad rushing into a leaking nuclear power plant to fill it with cement. How am I qualified? Huaishur widened his eyes. I am not being modest. There is no need for you to be modest. Ai Ching said calmly. Do you really think you are going to be a fighter? Stop joking. You are only going there to prove that the Shinhai Astronomy Association has contributed in this process. That way, you will be able to gain more merits in the end. If you are only there to provide information, the biggest reward will be shared by others. To put it simply, I will eat the meat and you will drink the soup. If we work together, I will eat more meat and you will drink more soup. It will be enough to fill up that small stain on your record, understand? There will be no danger, right? You'll encounter earthquakes, floods, and lightning strikes just by staying at home. Is there any ascender job that isn't dangerous? Ai Ching glanced at him. Is it so hard to ask for help when you're hiding at the back? Aren't you very good at leeching? Did I remember wrongly? That is not good, right? If you want to return with glory under the banner of the Astronomy Association, you can pretend that I didn't say anything. Let's talk about how to slack off. 2 hours later, a fully armed Huaishur appeared in the Special Affairs Department. Although he said that he was fully armed, he was actually wearing a hard-shell jacket that Crow had casually processed. In addition to the ceramic pieces inside, which were similar to bulletproof vests, there was also a layer of special iron powder applied to the inner lining. This allowed Huaishur to harden it at any time and increase his defense. Other than that, there was only one pistol left. Originally, he wanted to go to the Special Affairs Division to get some grenades, but as soon as he walked through the door, he was stared at by a group of macho brothers who were on standby, guarding against him. Because of his previous record, he was too embarrassed to ask Old Wang for another piece of equipment. Fortunately, he had brought a substitute. Huaishur then touched the 2 heavy bags of iron sand on his rapid response vest. He sighed regretfully and reluctantly withdrew his gaze from the warehouse. When are we leaving? When everyone's here. Director Fu glanced at him coldly. There was no trace of the malice that he had shown in the past few days, nor did he seem to harbor any hatred. It was as if he was looking at a stranger. It was as if his reputation value had dropped to the level of indifference. He didn't care about relationships or face. Everything was done according to the rules. Huaishur wanted to have a heart-to-heart talk with old Fu about her daughter, but she couldn't open her mouth. Fine, it's your family problem anyway. He sat in his chair and began to play with his phone. When he looked up again and saw the person who came in, he almost cursed out loud. Isn't this that guy? When the door opened, the person who walked into the office was a pale-skinned foreigner. There were still burn marks on his palm. He didn't look happy or unhappy, he just looked a little depressed. It was understandable. Whether it was being robbed or being locked up for half a month, it was probably the same. Clement seemed to have noticed Huaishur's strange expression. He glanced at him, but he couldn't remember where he met this kid. He nodded and looked away as he sat in the corner of the room. Who is he? Huai Shi resisted the stupid question of why he was here. He looked at Ai Qing. He's an ascender from Wanli Group. It's normal that you don't know him. Ai Qing looked down at the newspaper and said without looking up, in order to show his sincerity, Wanli's local manager volunteered to help the XIN High headquarters. He provided us with valuable manpower. You have to show some respect to your seniors, Huai Shi. Whether Huai Shi knew him or not and whether Wanli volunteered or not was another matter. However, Huai Shi understood the word senior. He was probably the cannon fodder in the senior's novel. You came here to take the blame, you even went to die. Huai Shi couldn't help but feel pity for him. After being tricked by him, he still wanted to help him. What kind of sin did he commit in his previous life? Forget it, I'll treat him better. Hey bro, do you want to eat some sunflower seeds? He took out a handful of sunflower seeds and tried to communicate with Clement before they left. Clement, a Russian Federation citizen, was also eating sunflower seeds. After he took a handful, he joined Huai Shi and ate a bunch of sunflower seed. However, it was obvious that he had a heavy heart and didn't say much. He didn't give Huai Shi any more time to cultivate any kind of bond. They left as soon as they arrived. 3 hours later, they were already on the open sea. Even though the operation this time was initiated by XIN High, in reality, it was led by the Jinling branch. The other 6 mental officers have been given an emergency order. In a while, you should be able to meet the mental officers and members from other places. On the way, Ai Qing took the time to remind Huai Shi, don't talk too much. Try to be as invisible as possible. Don't interrupt things that have nothing to do with you. You only need to stand there and you'll be able to complete your mission. Huai Shi sighed. How worried are you about me? What do you think? Ai Qing asked back. Huai Shi was speechless. In short, I'm just a decoration, right? He shrugged and gave up the idea of arguing with her. After all, he had so many criminal records. Even if he said that he didn't want to cause trouble, people would believe him. In the silence, he sat back on the chair and continued to make friends with the awkward senior. For some reason, he felt that Ai Qing was not in a good mood. Although she was expressionless from the beginning to the end, Huai Shi, who knew her a little more than other people, was keenly aware of the gloominess hidden behind the calmness. Soon, he noticed the source of the gloominess. They met up. The speedboat docked next to a huge cargo ship. The workers at the bow held up a light to illuminate the people below. Soon, they waved behind them and a rope was released. Come up. The people above shouted, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Huai Shi got up first, then he was stunned for a moment. He looked at the rope and then looked at Ai Qing, who was sitting in a wheelchair next to him. Ai Qing was expressionless and didn't move. She just quietly stared at the person above. Until the person's eyes began to wander, he finally took a few steps back and waved behind him again. Then, a mobile ramp was slowly released from the side. A laughing face emerged from the end of the ramp and said to Ai Qing, I'm sorry, the people below are ignorant and clumsy. It doesn't matter. The world never lacks people with mental problems. Ai Qing got up with the help of her crutches. She held the ramp and slowly went up. Step by step, she stepped on the iron ladder and walked to the deck. However, when she walked past the laughing face, she slightly turned her head and whispered in his ear, What we lack are brainless idiots like you. The laughing face froze for a moment. He took a few steps back and shrugged. It was just a joke. Why are you so? Excuse me, please let me through. Before he could finish speaking, a voice came from the side. Immediately afterwards, a black object swept past him, almost causing him to stumble. It was Huai Shi. He carried a wheelchair and swaggered up the ramp. He looked like a country bumpkin who had just entered a city and hadn't seen anything before. He looked around and sighed. Ai Qing looked at the wheelchair in front of her, then glanced at Huai Shi. She couldn't help but sigh. Do you remember what I said? Sorry, I don't remember too clearly, Huaisha shrugged. Ai Qing didn't say anything else. She just sat down and motioned for him to do his job as a cart pusher. It was a very promising job. Under the guidance of a staff member, they entered the cabin. The cabin was unexpectedly spacious. There were even a few old sofas. It was already filled with people. There were old and young people, and a few of them had origin substance fluctuations on their bodies. It was obvious that they were all officers from various places. Compared to the guy who had bad intentions, the other officers were quite friendly. After greeting each other, they all sat down and looked at each other. The detailed information has already been sent to everyone's phones. I'm sure everyone has already seen it. The middle-aged man from Jinling went straight to the point. That smuggling ship has about 16 armed personnel and 2 ascendants. When it comes to the fragments of the Philosopher's Stone, our prophecies might not be accurate, but there shouldn't be any discrepancies in general. I'm sure everyone has already seen the dangerous item storage plan. Just follow it. Old Xiao will be leading the operation this time. The rest of you will follow his orders. Are there any other opinions? No Tier 4? Before anyone else could speak, Ai Qing took the lead and asked, only 2 Tier 3. Isn't it a bit hasty to involve the Philosopher's Stone? There's no need. The man who had been laughing earlier said casually, it's just a fragment. Is there a need to be so careful? Yin, the Astronomy Association's operation isn't something you can play around with, Ai Qing said coldly. Think before you speak. It's just a smuggling ship and 2 ascendants. You're telling me that there's a need to mobilize Tier 4? Yin laughed disdainfully and glanced at Huaisha. Or are you afraid that something might happen to your little friend? If you're that scared, you might as well stay at home and make babies. Ai Qing didn't say anything. Her expression was indifferent, as if she had just seen an idiot. Cough cough. If there's a problem, I will help everyone. Next to the man at the head of the table, a rather thin young man adjusted his glasses and revealed a reassuring smile. After a moment of silence, the host's expression became somewhat complicated. Very quickly, he introduced him to everyone. This is the external aid for this operation. If there's a need, he will take action. Ahaha, there's no need to be so serious. The thin man waved his hand and laughed. He put away the pile of papers and odd-looking dice in front of him. If it's possible, I would like to be everyone's good friend. He introduced himself. Everyone can just call me KP. Chapter 118. Kate Peterman, please call him KP for short when he introduced himself. A sublimator from the border of the dark net. The rest of his information was unknown, and his background was quite mysterious. But thinking about the background of the border, it was normal. In that illusory world where countless nightmares overlapped, there were violent changes all the time, and there was no one with a clean background. Hiding one's identity was just normal etiquette, and everyone had hundreds of aliases. Who knew what the hell was behind a stranger standing in front of you? But this person's background was obviously not small. In less than 2 hours after Ai Qing reported the news, he directly got involved in the communication between the Social Security Bureau and the Astronomical Society through high-level channels, and even directly joined the operation team this time. But don't worry, I won't tell everyone what to do, he said with a smile. When necessary, I'll ensure that the operation goes smoothly, so please rest assured. Everyone looked at the host at the head of the table, and the man nodded slowly. That's the situation, he said. Although Mr. KP's identity can't be revealed, the higher-ups guarantee that he'll be of help to this operation. He always felt that he was sneaky and didn't look like a good person. Huaisha looked at that smiling face curiously, and KP seemed to have noticed his gaze, looked over, and nodded slightly at him. Huaisha suddenly felt a little absent-minded, as if he had heard the sound of dice just now. But soon, he forgot about it. Then, let's not delay. The smiling KP directly ignored the host and gave the order. Since everyone is here, let's get ready. In 10 minutes, we'll start. Ahem, let's begin. And so, all the sublimators involved in the operation got up and began to seize the last moment to organize their equipment. 2 rank 3, 5 rank 2, and Huaishur a rank 1. They all looked like experienced sublimators. Except for 2 people who were equipped with firearms, the rest were all equipped with cold weapons, except for pistols, and looked skilled. When they held the steel in their hands, the bloody smell in their eyes was even stronger than Huaishur's. Do you see? All official operatives have a border hunter's license. Whether it's their own accomplishments or abilities, they're incomparable to unorthodox ascendants of the same level. Ai Qing glanced at Huaishur and reminded him, just go and gain some experience. Don't rush to the front like a fool. What are you talking about? Yin Yan's cheeky face came out from the side and mocked. Is little Chrysanthemum's mother's class starting? He scrutinized Huaishur's appearance and nodded in satisfaction. No wonder cousin would kill that trash from the Qi family for him. The little puppy really looks like it. Boom! In the midst of the loud noise, everyone stiffened for a moment and looked over in astonishment. Almost all of the ascendants subconsciously pulled out their weapons and vigilantly looked towards the source of the gunshot. It came from Ai Qing. In the silence, only smoke rose slowly from the muzzle. Yin Yan stared blankly at the pitch-black barrel of the gun. Looking at the burning pain on his temples, he swallowed his saliva with difficulty. Sorry, it went off by accident. Are you okay? Ai Qing looked at her cousin with concern. Is there something wrong with your mouth? If you can breathe through that big hole, I'll help you open another one. How about that? Yin Yan's expression changed, and his face turned ashen. He didn't say anything else and took 2 steps back before turning to leave. After apologizing to the other ascendants looked away in confusion. The middle-aged host seemed to be about to speak, but in the end, he didn't get involved in the Yin family's trouble. Moreover, at this juncture, he didn't have the energy to care about this. Only Huaishur stared at Ai Qing in shock. Big sister, you're so tough. Do you admire me? Ai Qing put away her pistol. But you're the unlucky one. Huh. Huaishur was stunned. He's a gold-plated idiot. He won't dare to fall out with me, but he'll most likely vent his anger on you. Ai Qing reminded him softly. Be careful. Don't get shot in the back. Outside the cabin, Yin Yan looked at his staff member who was leaning against the deck and smoking. Do it cleanly, understand? Don't let anyone catch you. The smoking staff member nodded and grinned silently, revealing his sharp canine teeth. 10 minutes passed quickly. No one said anything. In the silence, only the sound of KP rolling dice could be heard. Soon, the 6 ascendants went down the rope ladder to the speedboat. When Huaishur stepped on the deck of the speedboat, he saw a blur in front of his eyes. The originally huge cargo ship disappeared in an instant. Even on the radar, there was no trace of it. He could only vaguely see the distorted air with his naked eye. Only when he touched it with his hand, it was still there. Old Xiao gave a few simple instructions, especially to Huaishur, who was doing this for the first time. Then, he started the yacht and headed for the deepest part of the vast ocean. After the novelty of the beginning, Huaishur felt a little dizzy sitting in the chair. His stomach kept churning and his face was pale. He was seasick. Soon, he was lying on the side of the boat and vomiting. Clement, who was next to him, could only sigh and hand him a tissue. Ha, an ascendant can actually get seasick. Old Zhao's assistant, the boorish man, was amused. He patted Huaishur's shoulder heavily. Why don't you stay here and wait for us to come back? Huaishur raised his head and opened his mouth to say something, but then he vomited even more violently. Soon, faint lights appeared in front of them. The lights of the ship. They could hear music coming from the deck from afar. It sounded like some kind of patty. It was very lively. Everyone looked at the huge ship on the waves in astonishment, dumbfounded. Those smugglers really had a lot of nerve. They were actually openly smuggling relics from the border on a passenger ship? This was completely different from what they had been told, but there was no doubt that there was only one ship on this route, and it was absolutely impossible for anything to go wrong here. Although the description of the ship's hull was slightly off, after they reported the situation to the command ship, they received the order to continue the operation. They looked at each other. Old Xiao, who was the oldest, was the first to speak. Then let's follow the plan and change the details. Yuan Long will go with me and directly carry out the mission. Lei Feizhou and Aniheng will be in charge of support. Clement and Huai Shi, you two. Forget it. Find an opportunity to blend in with the passengers. If anything unusual happens, be ready to provide support at any time. As he spoke, he looked down at his watch. It's now 11:40. We'll start the operation in 5 minutes. If you have any questions, hurry up and ask. Old Xiao. Huai Shi hesitated and raised his hand. Resisting the bone-piercing chill that had filled his body at some point, he squeezed out a smile with difficulty. I don't feel too good. In an instant, everyone's gazes turned to disdain. If you're the one who's afraid, you can go back first, Lei Feizhou, who had just teased him, said indifferently. In any case, you're not included. Huai Shi didn't say anything. He sat at the back, shivering. His face was ashen from the cold. After turning off the motor, Yuan Long, who was sitting next to Old Xiao, reached into the water. An undercurrent surged and dragged the ship forward quickly, quietly approaching the cruise ship. A few of the ascenders glanced at each other and quietly climbed up. When Clement went up, he looked at the shivering Huai Shi and sighed. He handed his gun to him. Take this for self-defense. If you really can't, he paused for a moment. You should go back. He also went up. In the silence, Huai Shi raised his head with difficulty and stared at the huge shadow of the ship. He felt as if the pitch-black silhouette was going to swallow him up. The melodious melody coming from the deck seemed to have turned into ear-piercing notes, mixed with a hoarse whisper. But when he listened carefully, he couldn't hear it clearly. Suddenly, a scream came from the deck. Then, it was silent again. Only a figure fell from above. With a bang, he fell into the water and gradually floated up. With the help of the light, Huai Shi caught a glimpse of the lifeless face. It was Old Xiao. In that instant, he stood up abruptly, reached out to start the motor, and clumsily maneuvered the speedboat to turn around and leave. It was impossible for him to get on the ship. It was impossible for him to get on the ship in this lifetime. He clearly knew that there was a ghost on the ship, yet he still forced his way in. Moreover, the premonition of death this time was so terrifying. It was as if it was urging him to die. If he still dared to act rashly, there would be a ghost. As the speedboat gradually moved away, Huai Shi finally felt a little more comfortable. The evil chill instantly disappeared. It was like a reward for making the right choice. He heaved a sigh of relief and looked back at the dark shadow of the cruise ship behind him. He shivered. When Huai Shi stepped on the deck of the speedboat, he saw a blur in front of his eyes. The originally huge cargo ship disappeared in an instant. There was no trace of it even on the radar. He could only vaguely see the distorted air with the naked eye. Only when he touched it with his hand, it was still there. How strange! Huai Shi sighed. What kind of magic is this? It's just a phase shielding technique from those scholars. There's nothing strange about it. You won't think much of it when you see more of it. Lei Feizhou, who acted as if they were close friends, patted him on the shoulder. Young man, you're so young and promising. No, I'm new here. Big brother, you're too arrogant. Huai Shi hurriedly took out a can of Coke from his chest pocket and handed it over. Old Xiao didn't say anything. Seeing that they were familiar with each other, he briefly reiterated the plan. Then, He reminded Huai Shi of some things to pay attention to and turned off the motor. Yuan Long reached out into the sea. Immediately, an undercurrent surged and carried the speedboat forward quickly. Clement looked at Huai Shi in confusion and asked, "Have we met somewhere before?" Stunned, Huai Shi immediately shook his head frantically. No, I've never seen a foreigner in my life. Big brother, you must have remembered wrongly. Come, have some melon seeds." As he spoke, he stuffed another handful of melon seeds into Luke's mouth. Then, for some reason, he shivered. He seemed to be a little seasick. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.